Once upon a time, Bioware ruled the world. Well, at least that's how it seemed from an RPG fan's perspective. From the late 90s until the 2010s, there were several developers who were thought of as the absolute gold standard for quality, originality, world building, and storytelling in RPGs. From Japan, we had Square, with their trademark Final Fantasy series putting out what people today still consider to be the best entries in their long-running series, as well as a whole slew of new IPs on both PlayStation 1 and 2. Then we had the likes of Bethesda Game Studios, pushing the boundaries further and further with their long-running series of first-person immersive RPGs, and by the release of the Xbox 360 and PS3, even being able to bring them to console gamers and significantly expand their market reach. And it was during these 2 decades, flanked by some of not only the best RPGs ever made, but the best games ever made, that Bioware stood tall. If I heard about a Bioware game coming out, that name was all I needed to hear, because I knew that it would be something I'd want to play. And look, it's 2026 at the time of writing. We know how this story ends, okay? But we're not here to talk about that. At least not today. So let's just enjoy some nostalgia for as long as we can. The Bioware of old achieved a lot of things in its time. The studio not only developed one of the most iconic CRPGs ever, but also the entire engine that it and many other games of similar caliber would be created in. For a long time, they were probably best thought of as the D&D guys. After all, they exploded onto the scene with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and also created the much-loved Neverwinter Nights, and multiple expansions for it along the way with Obsidian Entertainment. But they've actually got quite the varied resume when you drill down into it. The studio took bold steps into different genres, wanting to constantly challenge themselves with new and different projects. They put out an action game with MDK2, and even created one of the most out there Sonic the Hedgehog games on the market. But in my opinion, one of their biggest contributions to the world of gaming was bringing their brand of RPGs to not only console gamers, but gamers who didn't even like RPGs all that much. It's not that RPGs weren't available on consoles. Oh no, console gamers got plenty, and some of the best, especially from Japan. But for a long time, there was a big divide between what was available on PC and console. This was in no small part due to the difficulty involved with translating control schemes built around keyboard and mouse to a controller, and vice versa, as well as other hardware limitations that consoles have always had to deal with compared to the PC. With Knights of the Old Republic, however, Bioware showed that not only could CRPGs be played with a controller, but the game could be a massive commercial success. Of course, you can attribute some of this success to the Star Wars brand and the large fan base there who would play the game regardless just for the chance to enjoy another Star Wars story. But it also turns out that despite what marketing research may have once concluded, console gamers and PC gamers aren't all that different when it comes to what they want from their games. This led them to push that envelope even further with Mass Effect. It was a pretty wild idea at the time, create an RPG that would feel like playing a third-person shooter. The worst case scenario for something like this is that both fanbases would feel that their side of the equation was too diluted by the other and not be into it. But Bioware somehow nailed it. While that first Mass Effect is anything but perfect, it's still one hell of a game, and its story, world and characters won over a massive audience and made it seem like Bioware were just untouchable at the time. Thanks to incredible writing and world design, top-level voice acting and beautiful visuals, nobody seemed to notice that the combat was, well, if we're being honest, it's mid at best. And the Paragon Renegade binary system is also flawed, since you really just need to go all in one way or the other from the start to gain the most benefit from it. But here they were, a developmental Prometheus, taking the fire of RPGs from the PC master race, with their overpriced rigs and keyboard and mouse setups, and delivering it to the masses of console gamers and action game fans alike. With the success of Mass Effect guaranteeing the production of the entire trilogy, you may wonder, what could the RPG giant do to top that? Well, their answer was, go back to the beginning. All the way back to that first Baldur's Gate. Go back to making a pure RPG, one with real-time active pause battle, and an entire party of characters to control action by action. But since they were already so good at making this stuff on consoles, why not give those Xbox and PlayStation players a taste of what a real CRPG feels like? Show them what they were missing when we were all playing Neverwinter Nights. Let them explore some dungeons and slay some goddamned dragons. Certainly, Bioware and D&D had a good history together, but they felt it was time for something new. Something fresh. A new twist on fantasy, and one that was all their own. And that is how they began work on Dragon Age. I can say without hyperbole that Dragon Age Origins is one of the best RPGs I've ever played. It's not perfect, far from it in fact, but it gets it right where it counts, and I honestly can't think of many others that really nail the balance of story, role-playing and character development with fast-paced, heart-pounding combat that still requires you to make tactical choices and think carefully about how to bring down enemies in superior numbers, who are absolutely going to crush you if it comes down to a straightforward headbutt contest. The game was released in November of 2009, at the end of a 6-year development cycle that began sometime after the release of Neverwinter Nights in 2002. On a personal note here, I first heard about Neverwinter Nights while I was on a 5-month backpacking tour around Canada. This was quite a transformative time in my life, and led to me wanting to take things even further and actually live overseas in the future, which I do now. For Bioware though, the release of this game was also something of a time of personal reflection. In an interview, Bioware co-founder Greg Zashuk said,
"When we finished the Neverwinter Nights series, we said, let's take the things we've learned, the knowledge in creating all those great games, and make our own fantasy world, with some twists."
As great as it is to have playtested systems like D&D, and pre-made worlds like Forgotten Realms to play around with, they can present just as many limitations as they can opportunities to both your system and your storytelling. Until the release of Baldur's Gate 3, I had personally never felt that a true adaptation of any D&D system had worked in a video game, and that the system had actually been a massive barrier to the fun of adventuring and exploring in a world. We'll drill down into why that is later, but suffice to say, Bioware wanted to create their own systems and world, tell their own story and play with the infinite possibilities to be found there. To quote executive producer Dan Tudge here, he said,
"The big thing was everybody wanted to get away from the Wizards of the Coast rule set. We all wanted to be able to come up with our own rules. We didn't want 6-second rounds, which in Neverwinter Nights were kinda tedious."
Concerning the development cycle, creative director Mike Laidlaw had this to say in an interview with RPG Fan.
"I think we're at 6 years now. Of course, when you're dealing with a new IP like Dragon Age, or Mass Effect, or even Jade Empire, there's a bigger lead time than when you have like source books and other materials, so you need a small team to kinda establish the vision, goals, history, the world, etc. You basically need something to build on, or else the internal consistency breaks down. So in terms of real hardcore development, I'd probably say about 3 years of a full team working on it."
So they spent about 3 years just figuring out what the game actually was, before they even brought in a large team to build the damn thing. But Bioware was very different back then. They were a smaller, more independent developer who were transitioning into a larger one. There were no shareholders to keep happy, no arbitrary deadlines laid out or board members who'd never played a game in their lives to excite with graphics and unnecessary shit that was in that other game that was dead successful. A lot of what I'm talking about here comes from The Gamer's The Oral History of Dragon Age Origins. It's a fairly lengthy document that talks about not only the game, but what Bioware was like at the time, and how the circumstances under which the game was developed allowed it to become what it became. There's a lot of talk of a family atmosphere in Bioware during this period, with the founders knowing the names of every employee and even some of their spouses and children. One of my personal favourite anecdotes from here comes from Daniel Erickson concerning his recruitment into Bioware.
The first thing Bioware had you do when applying as a writer was ask you to craft a module in their previous RPG, Neverwinter Nights. So I made the module. Then, because it was a senior position, I had to do another one in 48 hours. Then I had to do another impromptu writing test in the building on interview day when I flew into Edmonton and was interviewed by approximately half the population of Alberta.
And concerning his training?
Once there though, it was more hurdles. Bioware had the most comprehensive and elite training program I've seen in game development. Basically, the first 3 months you were there, you didn't work on a game at all. Instead, you learned how to Bioware.
Sounds almost like a cult now that I'm thinking about it. Still, the somewhat disorganized approach to the game did place it in a kind of development limbo for a long time. For almost 3 years, the project existed as an extensive amount of lore created by lead writer David Gader, and an unfinished engine and tools for making the actual game. After his extensive vetting process, Erickson had this to say about rolling up for his first day working on Dragon Age.
Nobody can really tell me exactly what it is. It's been in production more than a year and has a ton of story content, but nobody has ever written a one-page brief or an IP summary.
And then there was the engine to deal with as well. Neverwinter Nights didn't look especially great, even at the time it came out. It was definitely a function over form approach that had its own stylized look. The game certainly didn't suffer for not having the best of the best individuals, but despite all the ready-made tools that the engine had for building modules and including features like multiplayer, and even some early concepts for the game being built in that engine, the visuals seemed like a huge limitation for what would be a next-generation game. Now, 2 years prior to the release of Dragon Age, a little-known Polish developer named CD Projekt Red released a PC-only niche RPG based on a Polish fantasy novel that I'm guessing none of you have ever heard of, called The Witcher. They had commissioned the use of the Neverwinter Nights engine for this, and really stretched the render in it far past what was originally thought possible. They seem like pretty cool devs. I wonder what else they'll make in the future. Even so, by the time Bioware got a look at this for themselves, they were already knee-deep in developing their new Eclipse engine to make this game worthy of both the consoles and PC hardware that would be available when it launched. This led to a few problems. Multiplayer, for example, was part of the original vision, and wouldn't have been that hard to implement using the Neverwinter engine, but it was something that had to be sacrificed in creating the Eclipse engine. At this point, we should probably introduce one of Bioware's biggest heroes, James Ohlen. James is a guy with a backstory and resume that could see him flying high as one of gaming's rock stars like Hideo Kojima or Warren Spector. But he'd much rather let the work speak for itself than have the spotlight shining on him. Prior to entering the fledgling Bioware company, James worked in a comic store and ran 2, apparently legendary, D&D campaigns, with his fabled Dungeon Master skills being so well known that there was a waiting list of players for these campaigns. His work on Baldur's Gate is considered the primary reason it was so successful, and he was granted the title of Director of Design at Bioware after that. He's also been called the Godfather of Bioware design, and is the real creative power behind all things Baldur's Gate, Old Republic, Dragon Age, and even Anthem. Because of his reclusive nature, it's hard to find actual interviews with him, but he did speak at a few game developer conferences, and if you are really interested in who made the games you love and how he went about doing it, I strongly recommend checking them out. While a lot of people were involved in this project, James was the vision holder, and according to the Gamer's article, that vision was something like this.
James's take on Origins was pretty simple and straightforward, but not so sexy as far as marketing is concerned. Bioware fans want Baldur's Gate again? Let's make our own Baldur's Gate. Everybody seems to want to work on Mass Effect. It's new, it's Unreal Engine, it's ambitious, it's the future. James's project is, in stark contrast, very clearly a throwback.
Mass Effect, of course, was the other big game being worked on at the time, and was looked upon as something like the future of the company, while Dragon Age was more like a thank you to everyone who had got them where they were today. Jennifer Brandes Helper, a senior writer on the project, also referred to Dragon Age as the neglected child of Bioware, and something often thought of as the obligation project. You punched in your time in the Dragon Age slog, so you could work up credits for the wild Mass Effect ride. Within Bioware, the project was also nicknamed Drag On Age, on account of how long it was taking with no real progress. It seems the Eclipse Engine team were much further ahead than the actual game team, and the lengthy development was taking its toll. Little by little, the project came together. Management was restructured, developers shifted around, a whole E3 demo that looks absolutely nothing like the final game happened. But by the end, Dragon Age had over 180 people crunching their way to the finish line with it. Multiplayer was suggested and then cut, along with a bunch of other features too ambitious to add into an already lengthy development cycle. There were endless bugs to fix, and some developers may have developed more than a few grey hairs in the process. In 2007, Bioware was acquired by EA, a monumental moment in time that would ultimately see one of the greatest RPG developers ever systematically abused and hollowed out until nothing remained of its former glory. EA weren't excited about Dragon Age at all. Had the project not been as far along as it was by the time the deal was finalized in 2008, it might never have seen the light of day. The air quotes geniuses at EA figured that the game would at best recoup its costs for its long development cycle from the hardcore RPG fanbase and never make another dime. It wasn't the sleek, sexy new thing with the popular cover-based shooting mechanics that Mass Effect was, so a sequel was very much off the table. This led to Dragon Age having something of a final ending, with epilogues being written up for the various characters in the party and everything being tied up as neatly as possible before the millions of words that had been penned to create the intricate world of Thedas, the Kingdom of Ferelden, the Darkspawn, the Fade, and the Grey Wardens were all put to the torch and never thought about again. This would, however, prove to be the first of many, many times that EA executives couldn't have been more wrong. I'll hold off on the full EA bad rant until at least the Dragon Age 2 video, but let's just say it's already bubbling beneath the surface of my skin as I type these words. Thanks to Bioware increasing their brand recognition to a more mainstream audience through their Star Wars games and Mass Effect, the world couldn't have been more hyped for whatever they had coming next. They had worked hard to translate keyboard and mouse controls to console controllers and make the game available to everyone on any hardware. The reviews for the game couldn't have been more glowing, and the chatter and word of mouth was all it took to push curious people who weren't sure if this was really their thing over the edge and get them to part with their hard-earned money and go on an adventure in Thedas. The feedback was resoundingly positive, and Dragon Age Origins outsold Mass Effect and became a potential powerhouse of an IP. Not because it was the newest, the sleekest, or the sexiest. Not because it had the best graphics and the things from the other popular games, but because it was a hell of an adventure in a fantastical world full of fully realized and likable characters with great combat mechanics and a knack of dropping a side-splitting joke at just the right moment.
Just what would you do if your mother died?
Before or after I stopped laughing.
Because the game was damn good. The genre of high fantasy is very formulaic. Basically, you get to rip off Tolkien with no consequences. So, elves are haughty and mystical, they live in forests and have a deep affinity to magic, dwarves drink ale and live in mountains, and the two hate each other with a burning passion because of slights that happened so long ago that any reasonable person would have forgotten about them. Humans are always thought of as upstarts and looked down upon by basically everyone, but get ahead through ingenuity and adaptability. Oh, and it's really important that all the best magic existed long, long ago, but thanks to some near world-ending event or war, all of those secrets have been forgotten. Now, I'm not exactly trying to disrespect high fantasy. Just because something has been done many times before, doesn't mean it can't be done again well. The setting of the Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter games, Forgotten Realms, is a very classical high fantasy setting, and while I have conflicting opinions about those games, their stories and worlds are absolutely stellar, and I had a blast both adventuring and GMing in the realms back when I had a regular D&D group of my own. Bioware no doubt love both D&D, Forgotten Realms, and the entire high fantasy genre too, as there's no way they could have put together RPGs with such compelling stories if they were just grinding it out for a paycheck. But since they were now poised to unleash a completely original system, story, and setting upon the world, They wanted to create something that was going to stand out, that could seem familiar at a glance, but once you dip your toe in, you're quickly up to your neck and nearly drowning. To achieve this, they set about subverting and even inverting a lot of the stereotypical features of high fantasy, and they began creating a world that felt dirty, diseased and corrupt. A fantasy that was quite a bit darker than most. While in 2026, we're all familiar with Game of Thrones for being both one of the most popular TV shows to grace streaming, and also for having a worse ending than Mass Effect 3, A Song of Fire and Ice was something confined to books in the early 2000s. But the concept of dark fantasy was well established in this media. Worlds that were dirtier, where the line between hero and villain wasn't always clear, were plenty popular in the literary space. But it wasn't exactly a tried and tested thing in the world of video game RPGs. This was a problem. Since games and movies cost a lot more to make and ship than a book does, there's always a question of marketing. Who are we selling this to? And how do we sell it to them? Thanks to the Lord of the Rings movies, the heroic fantasy or high fantasy genre was something understood by mass audiences. A game following that style was going to let you play a hero and have that kind of power fantasy as you play, and there was an established market for that in multiple game genres. So creating a world with a more dark fantasy tone had higher-ups a little on edge, even before the EA buyout. This led Jennifer Helper coming up with the term dark heroic fantasy. A way to say, yes, you get the heroic power fantasy, but you're still going to be dealing with a lot of shades of grey. Similar to both KOTOR and Mass Effect, players are going to have various options for how they want to roleplay their character and how they deal with various problems. But unlike those two previous games, Dragon Age wasn't going to judge them for their actions. Having it presented as a 3-word slogan that could easily fit into a marketing package seemed to ease tensions. As for introducing their new world and showing us all how it's different from what we've come to expect from heroic fantasy, well, of course, we would be discovering a lot about this during our adventure, but we'd get our first taste of it in the origin stories. But before we can talk about those, we should probably create a character. Your adventure starts, as so many do, with character creation. The hero of Dragon Age Origins is a Grey Warden of our own design. And since this is a post-Elder Scrolls Oblivion world, that means we get a massive amount of customization options in the creator. This type of stuff gives me full-blown choice paralysis. I mentioned several times in my Divinity video that I'd much prefer to have a dozen or so cool-looking presets to choose from and leave it at that, rather than having to sculpt every tiny detail of my protagonist's appearance right down to whether he's, let's just say, cut or uncut. That's a personal preference though. I know there are people out there who enjoy playing with a robust character creator more than they do the actual game, and no shame there either. Play your games however you damn well want. I managed to not get too bogged down in this one, and I'd say by the end I managed to create something absolutely cursed. Yeah, look at that jaw. You could split someone's skull with that thing. Aesthetics aside though, the real decisions that you need to make here are for your character's sex, race, and class. Your sex is only really going to affect your available romantic partners, if that's something you're interested in pursuing. However, race will, in one case, affect which classes are available to you, as well as provide you with certain benefits and penalties to those classes. And most importantly, it will dictate which origin story you start the game with, and tell us something about your character's personal motivations for adventuring. The 3 playable races are Human, Elf, and Dwarf. And the 3 starter classes are Warrior, Rogue, and Mage. So it's a very back-to-basics starting system. Dwarves cannot use magic, meaning that should you choose to play as one, you won't be able to take the Mage class. Likewise, they have a strict caste system in their culture, so your class implies something about the life you've led, the opportunities you've had, and the skills you've developed as a result of that. Fighters gain the Dwarven noble origin, while rogues are commoners. Elves likewise come in 2 flavours. There are City Elves and Dalish Elves. The short summary here is that the Dalish are nomadic tribes that hold as best they can to the ancient elven traditions and way of life, while city elves live in human cities, where they exist as second-class citizens, mainly in ghettos called alienages. Since we're going to encounter and learn all about these cultures on our journey, I'm just going to skim over their lore for now and tackle it all later. One thing that will hardrail your origin path regardless of your race is choosing to be a mage. By law, anyone with magical ability in Thedas must be taken to the Circle of Magi to be trained on how to safely use their gifts. This is because magically talented people have a high risk of falling under demonic influence and even becoming possessed. There is also an illegal form of magic called blood magic, and practitioners of this forbidden art can be put to death for it. At the Circle Tower, mages are taught how to shield themselves from demons and channel their innate talents into powerful spells. All of this is done under the watchful eye of Templars. Templars are paladin-style holy warriors who keep one eye on the mages with the intention of putting any that become possessed to a quick and merciful end. For this reason, the tower can feel as much like a prison as it can a university, and mages are always looked upon with suspicion, as if the proverbial sword of Damocles is always just about to fall on them. So that brings us to humans. There's only one human origin path, and that's the human noble. We'll take a look at this one in depth, as it's the one that I followed for this playthrough, but before we do that, let's spec out our character a little more. Once the lore stuff is selected, it's time to assign points into attributes, buy skills and some combat talents, before setting off on our big adventure to save the world. Attributes come in the usual set of 6. These are Strength, Dexterity, Willpower, Magic, Constitution, and Cunning. I'm sure these are easy enough to understand for anyone who's even played a single RPG. As a rogue, my most important attributes are Dexterity and Cunning. There's nothing wrong with putting some points into Strength, to have a rogue wearing tankier armor, or one who wields swords rather than knives. But I decided to go all in on that almost min-max, high-speed, high-damage glass cannon rogue, who strikes from the shadows and either one-shots their foe before they can react, or cripples their offensive capabilities with poisons and stunning attacks. Willpower is worth investing in with any character, as it not only dictates a mage's total mana for casting spells, but also the stamina a physical character has for using combat techniques. In the base Origins game, there are no stamina potions, so if you burn through your stamina too quickly, you're going to be waiting around for it to recover before you can use any of those big flashy attacks again. Next, it's skills. Skills are universal to any class, so you are welcome to be a warrior or mage who can pick pockets if you want to be, so long as you have the prerequisite cunning to buy the skill. Your class and origin will grant you a level in 2 skills automatically. You don't get to increase these every level, but as a rogue, I got a lot more skill points than other classes. For me, the first priority is always speech. I'm a big fan of talking my way out of trouble in any RPG. And since it's generally only the protagonist's speech that matters, I wanted this maxed out as early as possible, so I could sweet talk my way out of, and into, more interesting situations more often. Trap making is a good one for rogues that I wish I'd invested in with this character, but I didn't. I instead went all in on poison making, and proceeded to hardly ever craft any, because I got so many from enemy drops anyway. Finally, we have those combat talents. For rogues, there is at least one out of combat talent with lockpicking, but just about everything else is combat related. There are no mage spells for teleporting across the map or charming the people we talk to. They're all for blowing stuff up and crowd control. I'm a sucker for dual wielding, so I paid into that over archery with my protagonist. Later on in the game, various specializations will become available that will offer new skill sets to buy, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so now we just need a super cool name for our guy. Yeah, I went with a Planescape Torment reference. Sue me. The opening cutscene recounts the teachings of the Chantry concerning the Darkspawn. The Chantry is the primary religion in Thedas, and their scriptures say that heretical mages sought to breach the gates of the Golden City inside the spirit realm known as the Fade, and usurp the throne of the Maker, who is the Chantry's principal deity. Their staining of the perfect halls of the Maker turned them black, and in his wrath, the Maker not only turned his back on the world and the people he created, but also cast out the Magisters and returned them to the world as blighted monsters. These monsters began to spread their taint and multiply, becoming a terrifying blight upon the world. Averse to light, the Darkspawn first sank beneath the earth and laid waste to the dwarven kingdoms, claiming the Deep Roads as their own, and there they multiplied and began to wage their first war upon the surface. As with most of these fantasy wars, it took a great alliance of all races to stem the tide of the Blight, and at the vanguard of this army were the Grey Wardens. These specialized soldiers were drawn from all races and all skill sets. They exist only to kill Darkspawn and end their blight, and they turn the tide and force the Darkspawn back beneath the earth. 4 centuries have passed since the last blight, and time and politics have eroded the power of the Wardens. The Darkspawn are a problem easily ignored, and the warnings of the Wardens easily put aside in the name of short-term games for the powers that be. But now the Darkspawn have returned to the surface, and our narrator, a Grey Warden named Duncan, is of the impression that this could be the beginning of a new and terrible blight. And that's how we begin our story. The opening shots show a formidable military power mobilizing for a long march to join the King's armies in the south and battle the Darkspawn. We are told that this region is called High Ever, and we are members of the Kuslan family who have stewarded this land for generations as just and fair rulers. Only a generation prior to this, the Kingdom of Ferelden was occupied by the neighbouring empire of Orlais, and the Kuslans had fought fiercely for Ferelden independence against the invading forces. Our older brother is now set to lead the march south in service of the king, soon to be joined by our father and his old friend and comrade in arms, Allrend and Howie, who...
But we both had less grey in our hair then, and we fought Orlesians, not monsters.
Oh god, I know that voice.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
This is going to get very bad, isn't it? Our father's plan is to leave us in charge of the castle and the lands, and make sure that law and order is kept while the majority of his soldiers are away fighting the Darkspawn. However, at this very moment, an esteemed guest has also arrived at the keep. As head of the Grey Wardens in Ferelden, Duncan is tasked with scouting out talent among other things. While the Wardens have the right of conscription in a time of blight, Duncan isn't so bold as to invoke it. Rather, he has his eyes on one of the family's formidable knights, and hopes he will be willing to join. With the pleasantries out of the way, we're assigned some messenger work, and we finally get to rush off to play the game. I'm going to give this introduction a resounding A+. While a younger me was entranced by meaty cinematic cutscenes like you'd get at the start of Final Fantasy games, all I want from an introduction these days is a rough idea of who I am and where I am, and then to get control of my character as quickly as possible. Everything else, I want to figure out along the way. So I get some nice stylized art for the opening, and not long after that, I'm getting to choose conversation lines that reflect the personality of the character I'm building in my head. I'm pretty vanilla with this stuff, if I'm being honest. I generally play mostly good characters with something of a sense of humour. So I pick mainly heroic dialogue with a bit of snark thrown in there for fun. Once I had control of my guy though, I got straight to work picking every lock I could find and loading up on other people's stuff for absolutely no discernible reason other than this is an RPG and I'm sure I'll be able to flog it somewhere later. There are a lot of people you can talk to in this area. People who are part of your character's life, who've seen you grow up, and who, on occasion, have something they need you to do. We are after all learning the basic game mechanics here, and doing quests is a big part of this game. Our first combat experience takes place in a pantry with, you guessed it, giant rats. Because of course it's rats. It's always fucking rats. It's here we're also going to meet our bestest of boys, our very own personal Mabari Warhound who I named, well, it's the name of a best friend, right? The rest of the section is really about trying to establish both what normal life is like here, and the overall tension around the coming trials of the Darkspawn. Adan's mother, for example, is very concerned about the idea of her husband and eldest son riding off to aid the king, and seems well aware that he may never actually come back. We also see that our brother is a family man, with a caring wife and a little tyke of his own, with a head full of griffins and mighty swords, and the absolute certainty that everything will be fine that only a little child can have. Well, at least one who hasn't experienced horrific life-changing trauma anyway. Things take a turn for the worst after we head to bed though. Our Mabari, you guys are cool if I just call him Garrus from now on, right? Garrus is restless and on edge, and we are rudely awoken by one of our servants declaring the castle is under attack, but his warning is cut off by an arrow through the back. An arrow delivered not from some blighted monstrosity, but from a human archer. So it would seem all Howie has taken this opportunity, when most of the Kuslan soldiers are marching to the king's aid, to expand his own lands. All he needs to do is ensure that absolutely no one escapes this castle alive, and he can cook up whatever story he wants for the king's ears. Though this plot has quite a few more twists and turns, Adan's mother proves to be quite the capable fighter, and we even have a chance to inspire one of our servants to stand by us in the fray. What ensues is quite the epic and tragic battle, as the Howie soldiers overwhelm what remains of the Kusland house guards, and our hero makes a break for the pantry, where a secret passage offers a chance for the family to escape and report this attack to the king themselves. Unfortunately, it's already too late. Our father is now mortally wounded and being cared for by Duncan. After a heated argument, our mother decides to stay and make an ending with him, and while Duncan agrees to get us to Ostagar, that aid comes with a price. He came here looking for a Grey Warden to recruit, and he's not about to head back without one. And since we're both capable, and all that's left on the table now, we get the gig. Tearful goodbyes ensue from there, and we escape from our burning home and the comfortable life of a lordling to begin a new life, one that is many times more dangerous, and likely a lot shorter than the one we came from. Regardless of how you start your adventure though, all roads eventually lead to Ostagar. This ancient stronghold on the southern point of Ferelden was built by the old Tevinter Empire. Think the Romans with magic. And it is here where King Cailan and his army have chosen to meet the Blight head on and snuff it out before it can become a real problem for everyone in Ferelden, and the rest of Thedas for that matter. Duncan and Adan are greeted personally by the king. He's a strapping young man who's just a little too optimistic and naive, but he's very likeable, and he has enough political sense to at least remember the faces and families of his nobles. Despite leading from the front and seeing firsthand the horrors of war and the ferocity of the enemy, he's still got his head full of glory and old legends of kings and wardens fighting side by side. He's an incredibly charming young man based on first impressions, but not one that really seems to grasp how serious this situation is. He may boast of 2 victories on the field already, but the fact is, those victories were paid for with the blood of his soldiers, men and women who are never going to go home to their families now. And if he's serious about ending this problem efficiently, he should be more than willing to accept the aid of his uncle. It's here the term archdemon is first mentioned as well, and it seems the presence of one such creature is a sign that this is a true blight. With the formalities out of the way, and a promise from the king to fix the injustice brought down on the hero's house by All Howie, we're actually given a bit of time to wander the camp and learn a little about the world we found ourselves in. We glean a few little nuggets of information, such as that Mabari warhounds who drink too much Darkspawn blood can pick up its taint and grow sick and rabid from it. We also encounter a group of mages who've been deployed to aid the army, all currently working through a ritual to send their spirits into a kind of dream space called the Fade. And we see they're being closely observed by Templars. If we hadn't learned about the relationship between these two factions from our Origins chapter, this is where we get our first hint of it now. The encampment is a microcosm of the larger playing areas we'll be entering as the game progresses. There's places to buy and sell all your ill-gotten gains, a couple of small side quests to complete, and people to gossip with who can bring you up to date on the comings and goings in the camp. One thing to note is the troops seem well aware of Cailan's infatuation with the legendary Grey Wardens, and this is apparently a point of contention between the king and his general. We can even persuade this soldier to grant us a short and less than enthusiastic audience with the man himself, Tern Loghain, a man who...
His Majesty could not contain his excitement after your meeting. How could I not hear about you?
Oh god, I recognize that voice too. Mr. Kalen, Your Majesty, we need to talk about this man you're trusting your life to. However, the main thing we have to do here is prepare for the joining. This is a secret rite performed at the initiation of every new Grey Warden, and we're told that we're going to need some Darkspawn blood to get it done. So first we've got to meet up with the Warden's most recent initiated recruit, and the few other candidates who've made it all the way here. Grey Wardens, as we'll come to discover, aren't picky about where their talents come from, so long as it can be put to use battling the Darkspawn. Potential recruits could be knights with lands and titles of their own, thieves who are given a choice of join the Grey or go to the Noose, and even apostates and blood mages if they're not afraid of getting into a fight. So we link up with a somewhat mismatched group of a knight, a criminal, and Alistair, a man who is very quickly going to become our best bro in this whole game. We're given two initial objectives. The first is to find enough Darkspawn blood for the joining ritual, and the second is to retrieve some documents from an old Grey Warden chest that were sealed up here, back when the Wardens were more affluent and could afford to maintain outposts in the more remote parts of the world. And so with our objectives laid out, we head out into the Kokari Wilds and get our first taste of full party combat. We don't have to put too much effort in to survive this area though. In fact, we could basically stay in control of just our main character the entire time, and the rest of the guys would be able to take care of themselves no problem. That is if we only follow the critical path anyway. Even this early on, we're seeing that the game rewards curiosity by giving us side paths to wander down, quests to complete, and even something like an optional mini-boss to tangle with if we're so inclined. It's all part of the training really. The game is conditioning us to behave in a certain way, to go wandering down those little side paths and seek out trouble and treasure wherever we may find it. We also need to hoover up every tiny little piece of crap we can find along the way, because it'll either be something we can use here and now, something we can craft with eventually, or something we can sell later on in order to buy other things that we do need. Our little jaunt through the wild comes to a stop, however, when we arrive at the ruin of the Grey Warden's tower and find the chest already broken into, and then...
Well, well. What have we here?
Hello, nurse!
This is Morrigan. A couple of the boys aren't too keen on dealing with her on account of certain superstitions about inhabitants of the forest that circulate around here. Morrigan finds that all rather amusing, though the fact that her attire is completely resistant to even a slight breeze does lead one to wonder. Still, a little manners and polite conversation has her explaining that it was her mother who took the contents of the chest, and also that she'd be very willing to take us to her. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, as it happens, nothing in this case. This is our first encounter with Morrigan's mother, and despite first impressions, and a bad taste left in my mouth from the old lady I met in the forest while playing Baldur's Gate 3, she is quite happy to return our treaties to us, claiming that the seal on the chest actually wore off years ago, and far from stealing them, she's just been taking care of them. Well, isn't that a nice thing for her to do? No doubt all of our meetings from now on to the end of time will be perfectly friendly. So with our mission complete, it's time to return to Ostagar and partake of the joining. The reason the ritual is kept a secret is because it actually involves the drinking of an alchemical potion whose main ingredient is Darkspawn blood. Similar to the Witcher's Trial of the Grasses, the success rate on the joining is somewhere in the region of 50%. Wardens take the Darkspawn taint into themselves to develop the ability to sense the Darkspawn. There is another reason for this, along with a couple of nasty side effects, but we'll get to that much later. This joining doesn't go very well, however, when our first recruit proves too weak of fortitude to handle the taint. A second one decides to cut his losses and run, which Duncan does not approve of. And fortunately, we passed the trial because, let's be honest, this would be a very disappointing game if that's all there was to it. With the joining finished, it's time to move on to the main strategy meeting. Darkspawn tactics simply involve overwhelming their enemies with vastly superior numbers, so the strategy in this case is laughably simple. Cailan is going to put himself on the front line alongside Duncan, and once battle is joined, a signal fire will be lit that alerts Loghain's reserve forces to smash into their flank. The king has his head full of glory, while his general is deeply concerned with the risks he's taking. There's also a very intense moment here when the Empire of Orlais is mentioned.
That's the case. Perhaps we should wait for the Orlesian forces to join us after all.
I must repeat my protest to your fool notion that we need the Orlesians to defend ourselves.
I wonder if that's going to come back and bite us later. While the signal tower will apparently be safe, lighting the beacon is still an important task, and so, our fresh-faced Grey Warden and Alistair are assigned to handle it. I really like how they address why mages aren't just launching fireballs into the sky as well.
Your Majesty, the tower and its beacon are unnecessary. The
We
circle
will
of
not
Mage...
trust any lives to your spells, Mage. Save them for the Darkspawn.
It's almost like they knew somebody would have been rushing to Reddit, or I guess it would have been something awful or a similar message board back in 2009, to complain about this. So that's the plan laid out. Time to kill some Darkspawn. The pre-rendered cutscene that shows the Battle of Ostagar is really something spectacular. I have to respect Cailan for putting himself on the front line against such an imposing horde, though I'm starting to think that Loghain, was right about him not taking this threat seriously enough. As the mighty armies clash, we begin our mad dash towards the tower and the signal fire, only to discover that the Darkspawn are a lot smarter and more well prepared than we'd initially thought. The Warden and Alistair are met by a mage and a soldier who inform them that the Darkspawn have somehow entered the tower from below. It would seem that while he was imagining building his legend as a warrior king, Cailan forgot to consider that the Darkspawn spend most of their time beneath the surface of Ferelden, digging. I'd call the tower our first real combat arena, as up until now, I feel the game was playing with kid gloves on. We are still low level and we have very limited options in terms of using stealth or magic to control the battlefield in a clever way, but we still need to be careful in our advance to avoid becoming overwhelmed by our enemies, and we need to prioritize our targets on the battlefield so that we in turn don't get crowd controlled, disabled, and lose the whole fight very quickly. The fact is we are always outnumbered, and while our foes can't do a lot of damage, what little they can do will add up quickly if they aren't properly managed. There are also traps to contend with in this area, and at one point we even get to fire a ballista into a group of enemies. At the top of the tower though is where we get our first real boss fight, as a Darkspawn ogre decides to make an entrance and we are left to fight for our lives against it. We may have already seen some of the brutal and satisfying execution moves that we can pull off up to this point, but this one really makes you feel like a badass. And I mean that for every time it happens. Insanely cool. As we light the signal beacon though, our dreams of becoming Ferelden's saviors get dashed on the rocks by the bitter hands of betrayal. Upon seeing the signal, Loghain tells his people to sound the retreat and quit the battlefield. While he'll dress this up as some sort of strategic move to save thousands of lives, and quite possibly convince even himself of his lies later, this was clearly his plan from the very beginning. He turns his back on his king and half the assembled forces, and leaves them to face the relentless charge of the Horde, all alone. Duncan and Cailan fight back to back, and Duncan has one absolutely spectacular last stand against the ogre that dared to slay the king. It's too bad really. I liked Cailan. He was naive, sure, but I'll take a strong leader over a backseat manager any day of the week. And I doubt he could have ever imagined that his own uncle and the father of his wife would do what he did. As for our wardens, they are left fighting droves of Darkspawn as they flood to the tower room until they are too overwhelmed, and it all cuts to black. Awakening from what you assumed was certain death is no doubt quite the stressful affair, but doing so more or less naked, while the dream goth girlfriend you never got to have in your early 20s is staring at you, is going to add to the overall discomfort. Morrigan explains that her mother, who we've already established is likely some ancient legendary witch, saved us from the Darkspawn. It would seem both ourselves and Alistair were spared certain death, though the how and the why of it has yet to be explained. The why will be revealed soon. The how of it...
She turned into a giant bird and plucked the two of you from atop the tower, one in each talon.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Alistair is not taking what happened very well at all. On top of the shock that Loghain just abandoned Caelan, Duncan's demise means that he is now the most senior warden in Ferelden, and
Duncan's dead. The Grey Wardens. Even the king. They're all dead. Oh, this doesn't seem real.
Yeah, we are in a lot of trouble here, aren't we? This is also where Morrigan's mother introduces herself as Flemeth, a name Alistair knows as a somewhat legendary Witch of the Wilds. Far from them now being snared in some vile witch's pact though, all she wants in return is for the Wardens to do what they were going to do anyway, and fight and destroy the Blight. With a little bit of time and conversation, we can start to form something of a plan. Firstly, there's Caelan's other uncle, Arl Eamon. Neither Eamon or his soldiers were at Ostagar, and he is both popular with the nobles and a devout supporter of the king. He wouldn't be at all pleased to hear what happened here, and his voice would carry a lot of weight. Also, in a moment of pure deus ex machina, it turns out that the ancient treaties we retrieved from this very forest, only a military disaster ago, were in fact made between the Wardens and the elves, dwarves, and the Circle of the Magi. They basically compel all people of the land to unite beneath the Wardens in a time of blight. So it seems that we have the makings of an army and a chance to fix this mess. It's just going to take some stellar management to get all this taken care of, and Alistair is more than happy to offload the responsibility onto our newly minted shoulders. I suppose we should have seen that coming, really. In a final twist of fate though, Flemeth insists that we take Morrigan with us. While she protests at first, Flemeth makes it clear that she's well aware that her daughter has been itching to get out from under her feet for quite a while. And since the world is on the verge of ending, she may as well take this opportunity to see it while it's still there. So with that all taken care of, it's finally time for this adventuring party to strike out onto the world map and head for the village of Lotharine. Dragon Age doesn't have an exceptionally convoluted overarching main plot. We take on the role of a Grey Warden, our job is to stop a Blight, and we do that by killing what is effectively a big demon dragon. In terms of high fantasy plots, this is almost childish in its simplicity. But that's just fine because it's not the quest to kill the big dragon that's the real appeal of the game. The real star of Dragon Age is Ferelden. The great thing about a new game in a new setting is getting to take those first tentative steps out into an amazing new space and learn all about its races, their cultures and belief, and how all those things are integrated into the day-to-day lives of the people. Sure, we know fantasy has magic, and magic has spells, and we're going to use those spells to blow stuff up. But where does any of that come from? How and why does it work? And what do the people of the world think about it, and the people who can conjure it? Are they feared as heretical witches and warlocks? And if so, why? Did something happen historically to make magic something to be feared? Or do powerful political forces control a narrative around magic to keep the people in check? Dragon Age at its core is about exploring this amazingly rich and interesting world that's been built from the ground up for this game. Meeting a variety of weird and wonderful characters along the way, and through an application of Make Number Go Up, transforming ourselves from an unlikely adventuring band thrust together by fate into a well-oiled and overpowered team of super adventurers for whom killing dragons is just something they do before lunch. Multiple methods are employed to achieve this, one being environmental storytelling. We've already visited some old Tevinter ruins at Ostagar, and we understand that in the past, Ferelden was once part of an older empire that eventually fell. There's also an entire lore codex in the character journal that feeds you plenty of information about the places you visit and the people you meet. Since it's just text on a page, this is all optional stuff. You don't need to read it, but you'll have a greater appreciation of what you see around you if you do. It's a hell of a big codex if I'm being honest, but not a problem for the average Planescape Torment enjoyer, that's for sure. Mostly, however, Dragon Age shares its world through its characters. The people you meet all feel very much alive and fleshed out. The companions all have stories to tell about themselves, which further inform you about the world they grew up in and the values that they hold as a result of that. The enchanting bard Leliana can teach you about the primary deity of the world, the Maker, and his prophet Andraste, while Sten is a Kunari from a faraway land with a very alien culture to that of the people of Ferelden. We have a mage who lived their life in the tower, and one who grew up as an apostate in the wilds, and there's far more beyond that with all the other interesting characters we meet on our journey. So let's take this tour of Ferelden one step at a time, and get to know both the places we visit and the people we'll be trusting our lives to, all in the same breath. You can expect mid-game spoilers from here on out. First up, we'll be visiting Lothlorien to meet Leliana and Sten. Since we've stepped out of the Kokari Wilds, we now have to deal with the world map. Dragon Age is, thankfully, not an open world game, so the act of covering long distances over several days is handled more symbolically. Stepping into this wider world, we get a nicely drawn overview of Ferelden, or at least the parts of the country that we can explore, and some icons representing places we can visit. As we discover more locations for story and side quest reasons, more icons will pop up, allowing us to travel to those locations. There's also a little icon up in the corner that will let us go to camp. We'll deal with camp later, once we've got a few more companions in our roster, so for now, let's just click on a location and take a walk. We aren't quite ready to be turned loose on Ferelden yet, and we can only head to Lothlorien, as it's the closest town between Ostagar and the rest of the country. Moving around the map is basically a loading screen that sees a little blood trail across the surface moving from point A to point B. Along the way, we may get waylaid by a random encounter. These can be anything from roving bands of Darkspawn or opportunistic thugs to strange little moments like this.
How did a child survive that? The crater is still smoking. It's a boy. 5 fingers, 5 toes. That's all that matters to me. The Maker has answered our prayers. Let's go home, Marta, and raise the Tyke as our own.
In about 20 years, this is going to be the safest place in the world. And we even meet one of our companions through one such encounter. Early on, the variety of these makes them kind of exciting, but eventually they become more irritating than Final Fantasy random battles. Once all the little narrative scenes have been exhausted, and you're just left with random fights to deal with, these become more and more unwelcome, and I even wound up just reloading the game on a couple of occasions to try and skip some of these, because I was fed up with them. You may argue that as the game progresses and the Horde becomes even more dangerous, it makes sense for these encounters to increase. But going back to that Final Fantasy analogy, in those games, you gain various means of crossing the world map that allow you to skip a lot of tedious fights as you progress, making engaging with them a choice, and I would have appreciated something similar here. This isn't deal-breaking by any stretch though, just a minor to middling irritation really. Okay, so onto Lothlorien. Lothlorien is a trading town between Ostagar and Redcliffe, and is the next target for the approaching Darkspawn Horde. We arrive to find the place flooded with refugees fleeing from the south in the wake of the fall of Kaelan and his army. The Jarl of these lands has taken his soldiers and fled the area, leaving the people with no evacuation plan or any kind of authority to help mobilize them. As such, the first thing we encounter on the way in are bandits doing shakedowns of incoming travelers, basically extorting desperate refugees who are in no position to defend themselves. There really is nothing worse than someone who sees a terrible situation and attempts to make themselves better off by making everyone else's already miserable time even worse. The Chantry is currently trying to hold things together and organize an evacuation, as their Templars are the closest thing to an organized militia left, but they are way understaffed for the job. Not to worry though, because the Chantry has its own way of outsourcing its problems to talented individuals or groups with a mind to make a little money. That being the Chanter's Board. The Chanter's Board is one of several job boards we can come across on our journey. These are where we pick up all the C and D tier fetch quests or kill quests that pad out an area and fill your pockets with a little extra gold here and there. One pretty cool feature of the Chanter's board is the Chanter. These are special devotees of the Chantry who have sworn to speak nothing but the chant of light. Basically, they respond to everything with a passage from their holy scripture, which can be interpreted as the answer to whatever question they've been asked. So we can pick up some side work from here, including dealing with the bandits extorting the refugees, and later on, we'll be able to get some similar gigs from an independent mercenary band called the Blackstone Irregulars, and a collective of, shall we say, enterprising mages, who think of the rules as closer to guidelines, and occasionally need talented people to operate on their behalf. A big chunk of our time in Lothering is spent mopping up these little side hustles, but more importantly, it's here that we first meet a sister of the Chantry who came all the way from the neighbouring empire of Orlais, and a giant known as a Kunari, held captive and awaiting his death at the hands of the Horde. In Dane's Refuge Tavern, the Warden, Alistair, and Morrigan are confronted by several soldiers. Loghain has been hard at work telling country-sized porky pies about what actually happened at Ostagar. He's painted the events as betrayal by the Wardens, apparently in collaboration with the Orlesians, for some reason, and placed a significant bounty on the heads of any remaining Grey Wardens in Ferelden. We see in an earlier cutscene that he's further consolidating his power by declaring himself regent for his daughter Anora, who is the current queen, and as such, the de facto ruler of Ferelden until all this is settled. While not every noble is convinced of his story, there doesn't seem to be anyone with a powerful enough voice to really challenge his version of the narrative. History is forever written by the winners, after all. The confrontation in the bar ends in a brawl, one which sees a lay sister of the Chantry leaping to our aid, getting all bloody up beside us, and doing a damn fine job of it if I say so myself. The young redhead introduces herself as Leliana, and then launches into a story about how the Maker came to her in a dream and told her that she had to join us in order to stop this blight. It's difficult for even the most devout believer in the Maker's religion to take this seriously though, as the Chantry specifically states that the Maker does not interact with anyone directly, save for his divine prophet Andraste. This leads to both Alistair, who is a believer, and Morrigan, who isn't, to have their doubts about this woman's sanity. Now, my character, much like me, was definitely agnostic on the religious side of things, but he was pragmatic enough to see that this was a capable fighter who was willing to help him out in a world that had only recently been turned on its head. And hey, if she is telling the truth, it couldn't hurt to have a big deity on my side. Also, you know, she's kinda hot. We aren't going to be visiting Orlais until at least Dragon Age Inquisition, but it's a culture that's based on Renaissance France. It's a large empire full of extravagant palaces, where lords and ladies dance and engage in political intrigues, and wars are waged with information, blackmail, and assassins. Leliana is willing to open up about the land she grew up in early on, and we discover she's not only lived quite a full life travelling around and performing as a musician, but she's also acquired a collection of folklore from all over Thedas to share, as well as a good deal of knowledge about the Chantry, the Maker, and Andraste. Voice actress Corina Kemper does a great job of spinning a yarn, and all this helps Leliana to come across as very charming and endearing. Without a doubt though, her most memorable moment is when she sings at the camp for everyone. There's a lot of great music in this game for sure, but this is one of those absolute bangers that belongs on any chill playlist, and when contrasted with the constant struggle, the horrors of war, blight, and politics, this is just a really beautiful respite. A chance to escape from all the action and high-stakes decisions, and just be swept away for a few minutes. However, not all things are as they seem, and as with all of the characters, you need to cultivate trust with her before she reveals all. You see, while plenty of entertainers charm the courtiers of the Empire, there are specialized spies and saboteurs who use the cover of performer to enter the homes and good graces of all manner of nobles and ply their real trade therein. These are the bards, and Leliana was once one of the best. Bard is a specialization that can be taken by a rogue. The 3 base classes have multiple specialization paths available, and we can take a total of 2 specializations per playthrough and add a third one during the Awakening DLC. Certain characters already come with specializations unlocked to reflect the circumstances of their lives and the types of training they've undergone. With these characters, you can use the game's affinity system to eventually convince them to teach their special skills to other members, or to you. Doing so will enable you to take that specialization and unlock the skill set it provides. You still need to spend your points when you level up to get those talents though, so it's better to get these unlocked as early as possible to get the most out of their benefits for everyone. Not every specialization is accessible from your companions though. Books can be bought at a considerable expense to unlock some, and others, such as Duelist, are unlocked by talking to and helping out specific NPCs. It's quite possible to do an entire playthrough without unlocking some, or even all of these, and I wouldn't say these skill sets offer really drastic variations in playstyles, but they're nice additions, and from a role-playing standpoint, I appreciate them. For my character, I chose Assassin and Duelist, as I wanted to craft this deadly Sword Saint style character who could pop up in the midst of enemy lines as their beefier members were charging down Alistair, and then gut their mages and archers before they had a chance to react, possibly vanishing back into the shadows Batman style if the heat got too much for him. So Leliana used to be a bard before she heard the calling of the Maker and joined first the Chantry, and then our band of merry misfits. This is how she acquired her skills in stealth, lockpicking and archery, but she can also bolster the team or distract and demoralize enemies with the power of her song. She eventually opens up to the Warden about why she left Orlais and came to Ferelden, when she explains that her own mentor, a master bard named Marjolaine, betrayed her. It would seem that a lifetime of politics, deceit and intrigue had left Marjolaine convinced that Leliana would one day strike against her to usurp her power, and decided to take the initiative in a battle that was entirely in her imagination. We actually have a chance at resolving this later in the game. Each companion has their own loyalty quest of sorts, and Leliana's triggers when yet another band of assassins show up to try and kill us, and Alistair and I discover that for once, we aren't the target. She is. There are various ways to resolve this, as there are with just about every other major quest in the game. As a trusted confidant at this time, Leliana will take our advice on the situation, and the outcome here will actually affect her disposition and the kinds of actions that increase or decrease her affinity going forward. Despite joining the Chantry and her newfound devotion to the Maker, Leliana is still a free-spirit at heart. Asking her about life beyond this blight sees her dreaming of travelling far and wide again, and uncovering more of the mysteries of the world that she lives in, which she clearly loves very dearly, and is willing to risk even her own life to protect from evil. We encounter Sten locked in a giblet just outside of the town, with a few people jeering at him. The giant of a man seems to be taking it very well, and when approached he makes it very clear that he is in this cage because he chooses to be. He recently murdered an entire family of farmers, and wishes to be brought to justice. Sten is a Qunari, and these are definitely one of the more interesting cultures within the Dragon Age world. What we learn in this game is somewhat limited compared to what we discover in later titles, but Qunari literally means people of the Qun, or people who follow the Qun. The Qun is a philosophy and a way of life, so while there is a race of large horned people who are generally associated as being Qunari, anyone who follows the Qun is considered a Qunari, and likewise not everyone born of this race follows the Qun. Sten specifically was sent to Ferelden with a group of his kind by his leader, the Arishok, to answer one simple question. What is the Blight? Sten is incredibly direct, to the point where you start to think he's just trolling, and talking to him at the fire can lead to negative outcomes more often than not. Okay, I guess we should get into this about now, because powers in Dragon Age use cooldowns and a mana system versus D&D's absolutely absurd daily spell allowance. You aren't really compelled to camp at any specific time. However, it's one of the few places where you'll have access to all of your characters' inventories, and will be able to shuffle around their equipment before selling off anything you don't want. The party is also followed around by a couple of enterprising dwarves, who we meet for the first time on the outskirts of Lothering. Bodan is a dwarven merchant whose wares are mainly acquired by looting battlefields. He got his start in lost item redistribution back in the dwarven city of Orzammar, where he would routinely send exhibitions into the deep roads to retrieve lost artifacts. That was where he found a lyrium-addled child who he adopted and named Sandal. This too proved a wise investment when he discovered that Sandal has a talent for enchantment.
Enchantment?
Yes.
Enchantment!
And now the two travel the surface, plying their trade. Funny how they're always going the exact same way we are. There's no stash in the camp to deposit items and gifts you want to hold back for later, which is really annoying, as your inventory can fill up fast, but it's a good place to check in with all your companions, hand out gifts that you found or bought on your journey, and have longer conversations about topics that they aren't willing to get into out in the field. What I like about this system is that winning over your comrades isn't as simple as always being nice to them. Sure, a silver tongue will get you into Leliana and Alistair's good graces, and possibly into their beds, but Morrigan, Shale, and Sten all run quite counter to expectations, to the extent that Morrigan disapproves became something of an in-joke among the DA fandom. Sten has little time for pretty words. He'd much rather not talk at all, or speak in the most direct way possible. In one situation where I was confronted directly by him about my actions, I simply told him I wasn't here to live up to his expectations and pieced out of the conversation. I got a +10 positive approval for that, while any attempt to placate him would have no doubt resulted in disapproval. This is because of Sten's cultural differences. The Kyun is quite a complicated philosophy, and for this reason, most Qunari are hesitant to talk about it. The Qunari have their assigned roles, and they understand the parts of the Kyun related to those roles, but only their priesthood could be considered well versed in all things Kyun. It's generally not advised to talk to Sten in the camp. He's really not that interested in small talk, and trying to force it on him will only heighten his disapproval. It's better first to throw some gifts his way to get his approval up before trying to broach any serious topics with him. Though, you do need to talk to your companions first to get an idea of which gifts they'll appreciate more than others. Sten especially likes old maps and paintings, implying quite a layered personality. We don't have to free Sten, of course. He openly admits to his crime and thinks that he should be punished, but he is just as amenable to death on the battlefield facing Darkspawn as he is to being left locked in a cage for them to come and end him. Again, a pragmatic warden would see a tower of a man who's willing to kill things on his behalf and see an opportunity. And while we are new to this gig, we'll discover soon enough that the wardens take help wherever they can get it. It takes a while, but you can get Sten to open up about the Kyun and about how he came to Ferelden and wound up trapped in a cage outside of Lothering. Sten isn't a name, but rather a title. He was assigned the role of a warrior and was expected to live up to that position. This is an important part of the Kyun. People can't choose their role in society. It's given to them, and all those roles serve the society. Your role is more important than your personal identity in the Kyun, and the needs of the society always trump your own. The Qunari have little use for money or personal affectations. They are a pragmatic and somewhat fatalistic people. While a Ferelden might see this as a restrictive system, Sten thinks that many Fereldens lack direction and purpose for having so much choice in the first place. He also thinks it's cruel that their society allows people to starve, while others grow disgustingly rich. The nobles amass far more wealth than they could ever need, and the poor and destitute could all serve their society in some way, if they were given a purpose. We also gather from some of the banter he engages in, that the Kyun has a lot to say about women on the battlefield.
Women are priests, or merchants, or artisans, or farmers. None of those have any place fighting.
What's interesting about the Kyun is that I could honestly see how someone raised in this culture could see it as superior to Ferelden's more individualistic culture. As a Ferelden in the game, and raised in Western culture in real life, I can see many problems with the Qunari way of living, but they can see just as many with ours. And I have to say, providing I wasn't grossly dissatisfied with the role I was placed into, I could see the appeal of being in this society that seems to appreciate everyone's contribution equally, and takes care of everyone as well. When Sten and his kin came to Ferelden, they were ambushed by Darkspawn. Caught off guard by their savagery, all but Sten died in that battle, and he himself was left badly wounded. He was taken in and nursed back to health by a family of farmers. It's quite possible he felt that he should have died out there on the field, but what was worse was that he had lost his sword in the battle. For a Qunari warrior, the sword is the soul, and similar to a Spartan without a shield, to return without his sword would mark Sten as a coward and see him killed. He had been robbed of honourable death on the battlefield with his kin, and now he could never return home. In his panic, he flew into a rage that saw him commit those terrible crimes, and in his regret, he allowed himself to be taken to face judgment and punishment. We can, through his companion quest, reunite him with his lost blade, an action that transforms our relationship entirely. Sten's respect is hard won, though the first in the party to get it is your Warhound.
You are a true warrior and worthy of respect.
But those who do have his respect see a very different side of him, and he grows to appreciate the Warden, respect their leadership, and ultimately follows them all the way to the final battle. Leaving Lothlorien soon sees it fall to the advancing horde, and any left behind there slaughtered to a man. Well, almost. You see, unknown to us, a mother, her 2 apostate children, and a sword-wielding but less charismatic son will actually have a desperate struggle to escape that sees them aided by none other than Flemeth herself looking kinda badass, all things considered, before rushing off to the City of Change in the Free Marshes to craft a legend of their own. But that
is a tale for another time.
We, on the other hand, go more or less directly to the Circle Tower. I say more or less because buying the game these days means you get all the DLC included with it, and some of that stuff becomes accessible once you get onto the map in earnest. The Warden's Keep, Return to Ostagar, and Shale DLC are all available once you leave Lothlorien, and they're worth taking care of quickly just because of the high level loot you get from doing them. In Return to Ostagar, for example, you can acquire Duncan's blades and Kaelin's armor, while also discovering the King's fate. He was such a likeable guy. We can give him something like a proper send-off though, once we've tied up a few things. Warden's Keep deals with a little bit of Ferelden history, and specifically the last stand of the Grey Wardens before they were ultimately booted out of Ferelden. As mentioned before, the political standing of the Wardens once the Darkspawn are no longer an immediate threat is sketchy at best. Without a Blight to save the world from, they feel more like a drain on the coffers in the eyes of the nobles, and the Wardens have also, on occasion, needed to pick a side in political disputes. As such, they've been in and out of favour in various places at different times, and even violently ejected from certain realms, which was the case here. It's here we get a taste of that Wardens use any tools they can to defeat the Darkspawn philosophy, when we witness the apparitions of their last stand, and we see them unleash blood magic and a host of demons upon their enemies. It does not go well. While I appreciate having more game to play, and really enjoyed these back on my first playthrough, they do kinda break the game. Not in a massive way, but you get access to a lot of high level stuff quite early on by completing these. Of course the weapons and armor have stat requirements, meaning a low level character isn't going to get to use them straight away. But this stuff is so good that you'll be using it through a big chunk of the game, and it subtracts from the fun of stumbling into new pieces of enchanted weapons and armor for your crew out in the field, because you've already got something better from the DLC. Anyway, it's generally recommended that you get over to the Mage's Tower once you get out into the world, as early as possible, because that's where you're going to meet your dedicated healer. Since magic is one of the big X factors that makes fantasy fantasy, the how and why it works and what people think of it is generally one of the things that makes a fantasy setting interesting. In Forgotten Realms, for example, magic is as common as electric lights in big cities like Waterdeep or Baldur's Gate. A +5 Vorpal sword might set you back a pretty penny, but cold-burning voice-activated torches aren't all that hard to come by. There's also the question of if magic is something anyone can learn through hard work and study, if you need to be born with some kind of innate talent for it, or maybe there's a combination of the two. In the case of Dragon Age, mages are born with magical talents and then sent to the Circle for training. Now, we've already touched on the Circle briefly in the Origins section, but let's drill down into it here. It was the Magisters of the Tevinter Imperium who supposedly breached the gates of the Golden City, earned the ire of the Maker, and became the first Darkspawn for their sins. Sometime after the first Blight, the Prophet Andraste, a kind of Joan of Arc style character, united many people in a great rebellion against the Tevinter Empire and their mages, and ultimately freed Thedas and established the now dominant religion therein. We're going to have more to say about her later, but maybe you can see why the Chantry stigmatizes magic. One of its teachings is that magic serves mankind and does not rule over them. This is why magically talented children are carted off to isolated locations to be schooled in how to control their power, and use it for the betterment of humanity, rather than to dominate them. Well, that and demons. Demons and other spirits, including some helpful ones, come from a realm called the Fade. It's a metaphysical space that can be accessed when dreaming, or through various rituals performed by mages. Spirits in the Fade aren't exactly the ghosts of dead people. Bad memories can linger in the Fade and manifest as spirits, and some souls can be trapped there, or will stick around of their own volition. But there is a beyond the beyond, so to speak. The character of Justice mentions in the Awakening DLC that even his kind don't know what happens to mortal spirits once they leave the Fade. The demons of the Fade seem closer to Buddhist praetors than the fallen angels of the Abrahamic religions. They are creatures that are enslaved to their desires, and it's possible for any spirit to become a demon if they become too attached to their wants. Demons seethe with envy for the world of flesh and solid matter. They crave to feast upon mortal souls and walk around in their skin. Because mages are especially susceptible to this, a big part of their training, up to and including an actual confrontation with demons in the Fade, is about resisting them lest they become abominations. And we are very soon going to encounter a lot of abominations. The Circle operates with Templar oversight. Our one and only best friend Alistair was once a Templar in training before he became a Grey Warden, and he can use their abilities to cleanse an area of magic, effectively resetting buffs and debuffs, and making the poor mages have to wait for the spells to refresh so they can cast them all again. Templars and mages are dependent on lyrium for their powers though. Lyrium is a mineral that exists both beneath the surface of Ferelden and within the Fade itself. It's the lifeblood of magic. Lyrium potions are used to restore mana mid-combat, and all Templars have to imbibe it to use their abilities. The major problem though is, it's addictive, and has side effects. Many of the mages, rightly in my opinion, chafe at having armed fanatics looking constantly over their shoulder with suspicion and one hand on their sword pommels. And while a sensible person might think that the best way to change things is through cultivating trust between the two factions, less thoughtful and more hot-headed members of Team Magic feel the fastest way out of this is to do the exact thing that the Templars don't want them to do. That being use a bunch of blood magic to summon in a ton of demons and set about killing and possessing everyone and everything that moves. Yeah, that'll teach the pesky Chantry not to trust us mages. And we arrive at the tower, looking to use our treaties to conscript some heavy artillery into our army, and basically come face to face with something that's going to be kind of a trend on our journey. That being, finding the people we need to help us in some state of total chaos, and having to bail them out so they can commit resources to battling the Blight. The tower has basically been overrun by demons and sealed up by magical barriers, and there are mages and Templars trapped in there with a bunch of demons and blood mages. We can convince the Templars to let us take a crack at solving the problem, at which point, the dynamic changes from the mages being trapped in the tower with the demons and abominations, to the demons and abominations being trapped in the tower with us. What makes this particular section more than just a straight up dungeon crawl though, is our encounter with a sloth demon that drags us into the Fade and attempts to subdue our spirits there while our bodies remain uninhabited and slowly rot away to nothing. Mechanically, this really is just the same as fighting through any dungeon, with an interesting coat of paint, but for a few interesting mechanics. Firstly, the Warden will be alone for more or less the entire section. While locating your companions and breaking the illusions that subdue them is part of the mission, you won't become fully reunited until the final battle with the Sloth Demon. Traversing the Fade requires us to overpower several other demons and gain the power to transform ourselves into different shapes with different abilities. Each new shape will allow us to bypass certain barriers. The mouse shape is small and stealthy and can travel through various burrows in the dungeon, while the golem shape can smash through heavy obstructions. In a kind of Metroidvania way, it's worth revisiting each area again once you've unlocked the other abilities, as there are permanent stat upgrades hidden in the secret areas on each part of the map. So you traverse this puzzle dungeon until you can free all of your friends and trace a path into its centre for the big final fight. It's a nice change of pace from just bludgeoning your way through your problems, though we still have to do a lot of bludgeoning if I'm being honest. At the top of the tower, the whole mystery becomes unravelled when we finally meet Uldred, the mastermind of this... revolution? You see, he's this guy.
The tower and its beacon are unnecessary. The
We
circle
will
of
not
Mage...
trust any lives to your spells, Mage. Save them for the Darkspawn.
Not a fan of the Chantry and the oversight of the Templars, Uldred had actually made deals with Loghain to get the tower on his side in exchange for more freedom from the Chantry. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't the only mage to return from Ostagar alive and inform the first enchanter of what actually happened there. As such, they weren't keen on throwing in with Loghain, given he'd just betrayed the crown and left thousands of people to be slaughtered by Darkspawn. So since the circle couldn't be coerced, Uldred decided to take more drastic measures and basically do the Templars work for them. What an absolute moron. The Templars coming to purge the entire tower, down to a child, is now on the table because of his stupidity. And we can even go down that route if we want to. I opted to spare the mages needless slaughter, and took the fight to Uldred, which led to a climactic fight with a pride demon. Which of course, meant it was time to rip and tear until it was done. Poor Uldred. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for that one other mage. Which mage is that, you ask? Well, that would be Wynne. We actually meet Wynne briefly at Ostagar, and she barely escapes from the battle with her life. Kind of a shame then, for her to return to her home and sanctuary, only to have the place become overrun with demons, and for her to have to seal up the tower, with many of her comrades still inside it, in order to protect the younger apprentices, and prevent the demons from escaping out into the world at large. I don't envy her that decision at all. Personality-wise, Wynne is very much on the straight and narrow. She's quite the opposite of our apostate witch Morrigan. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about her or her mother. We'll get to those two eventually. She's a senior member of the Circle, and spends a lot of time instructing not only magic, but philosophy and ethics to the apprentices. Morrigan isn't using euphemisms when she describes Wynne as an old school mistress. My character Adan romanced Leliana. I'm sorry guys, I know big titty goth girl is hot, but growing up is about realizing that cute, bisexual, mostly mentally stable redhead is the better choice than Little Miss Intimacy issues over here. Quite a few of the crew had something to say about our dalliances, from playful jabs to outright revulsion. But Wynne was the one who stepped in to offer wise, if somewhat unwanted, counsel. Regardless of anything else, we were soldiers fighting an unspeakable evil, and tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. But, you know, it never is, so whatever, right? On the other hand, as commander of our little family that slays together, I may be required to give orders that place Leliana very much in harm's way, and she in turn could respond emotionally in the event I came to harm. While I politely informed Wynne that her nose was best kept in her arcane tomes and all the way out of my damn business, I respect that she spoke her mind. A good leader should take counsel from people who are going to tell him the hard truths they don't want to hear, so they can make the best informed decision on how to move forward, and likewise, keep them appraised of when their oversized head has become jammed up their oh so perfectly formed arse. Also, it's very clear that this counsel came from a place of caring and empathy. Wynne is a woman who has lived a life, and while there's no Mr. Wynne that we're aware of, I suspect all that time spent teaching and helping bring up the new generation of mages has fostered motherly talents in our old girl. Wynne comes with quite a few spells and the Spirit Healer class preloaded. She's more or less an essential component of any party, as this specialization not only keeps your characters on their feet for longer, it's also the only way you can revive an unconscious teammate if they're felled in a fight. Yep, no Phoenix Downs here to get you out of a pinch. Since we're here, we may as well explore a little more of what's available in the magic department. As mentioned before, talents are all focused on combat. There's no dimensional door or levitation spells to help you get around. This is all about taking and receiving damage to one degree or another. As is the cases in most fantasy RPG settings, mages have the most diverse range of powers to choose from, meaning that while a warrior only gets to choose between being more damage or defense focused, two mages can bring entirely different playstyles to the table. It can be really easy to go down that primal path, where all those big flashy high damage spells are, and while these are very fun, they come with risks, as friendly fire is a very real threat in this game. So if you're going to drop a fireball in the midst of a melee, be prepared to heal any of your guys who get caught in the middle of it after. While it can be handy to have a few big guns in your arsenal though, mana is better spent on things like crowd control. With Wynne, I eventually went down the glyphs route. Since mages aren't going to last long against a determined charge that gets into melee range, that repulsion glyph saved her life on more than one occasion. Likewise, being able to drop a paralysis glyph on a powerful enemy and buy the rest of the team some time to take out their adds can be invaluable when dealing with greater numbers. Even a well-armoured tank can get overwhelmed, and because of cooldowns, there's only so fast you can drop heals and drink down poultices to keep your health up. I took this crowd control approach to even higher levels with Anders in the Awakening DLC by investing heavily in the Entropy School. Both he and Morrigan had that super handy mass sleep spell to put a group of enemies out of commission quickly, but Anders also had mass paralysis to really help dominate the battlefield, and crushing prison to both disable and do a large amount of damage to elite level enemies. Also, Walking Bomb is kinda fun. It's a status you can inflict upon a weaker enemy that causes them to explode upon death, and can do some pretty heavy damage in the middle of a dog pile. My point is, magic is quite diverse and fun, and no two mages play exactly the same. The spells you have available will actually affect the roles that the other characters will play in the fight, which is both very cool, but it's also kind of a shame that there's no way to respec characters. After all, while the game seems balanced enough that every build is viable, on a first playthrough, you aren't truly going to know how effective a spell or power is, or how often you feel the need to bust it out until you try it, and since there are no refunds, it's already too late at that point anyway. There are two big revelations about Wynne that come later in the game. The first comes during one of those annoying world map ambushes, where Wynne will go Super Saiyan on the enemies, but black out not long after. With a high enough approval rating, she'll confess later in the camp that she actually died during the battle for the Circle Tower, but was revived by a spirit entering her body. Were the spirit a demon, she would actually have become an abomination, but Wynne has always felt like she's been watched over by something benevolent in the Fade. This connection is apparently what made her such a talented spirit healer. She claims she's living on borrowed time, as once the spirit returns to the Fade, she's basically done. But as the more senior member of the group, she's had plenty of time and opportunities in her life to come to terms with her own mortality, and is happy to just take it all day by day and live on her own terms. After all, as already mentioned, tomorrow isn't promised for any of us. And given all the troubles the world has with Darkspawn and Maker knows what else, maybe we could all stand to just take it one day at a time forget the hurts and grudges of before, and focus on what we can do to make things better in the here and now. Wynne's companion quest focuses on her first apprentice, an elven boy named Anarion, who she considered her first big failure. Similar to Quistis in Final Fantasy VIII, being something of a talented student, Wynne was used to excelling at everything she did, and just assumed she'd be able to excel at being a teacher too. She applied the standards to her apprentice that she held herself to. As such, she was constantly disappointed by him, and was a strict taskmaster who never really engaged with her student as an actual person. Anarion wanted to seek out the Dalish who he looked up to, but Wynne just told him to concentrate on his studies, and often berated him for his failures, ultimately leading to him fleeing the circle. She had heard that the Templars hunted him down and eventually killed him. If we ask around at the Dalish camp though, we discover this is not the case. He was left for dead, but the Dalish found him and nursed him back to health. He now lives as a solitary apostate mage, and the Dalish call him a healer. When Wynne comes to apologise to him, he tells her that it's long in the past, and he has already let it go. After all, his trials led him to where he is now, and he has become far more content than he ever could have been in the tower. Sometimes it helps to know that one path just isn't for you, so you can appreciate the one that is. She's wise and empathetic, and despite her talents and many successes, she's not afraid to admit her limits and shortcomings. She takes her life day by day, and is grateful for each morning when she opens her eyes, and it's nice to see that despite being something of a Circle Tower golden girl, Wynne isn't universally liked by everyone there.
Shocking, isn't it? How could anyone not love gold and glorious Wynne to bits?
The dwarves of Dragon Age are cut off from the Fade. They don't dream, and they can't use magic. Rather than worshipping the maker of the Chantry, they worship their ancestors. They mine pure lyrium so it can be refined into something more suitable for magical use, and worked into magical runes that can be used for enchantment.
Enchantment?
Yes.
Enchantment!
Generations of exposure to the source of magic has forever changed the mining caste of dwarves, and built up a powerful resistance within them, making them the only race able to extract this stuff safely. In the time before the Darkspawn, the subterranean empire of the dwarves was vast, and stretched beneath entire continents. The Tevinter mages no doubt had no end of need for lyrium, and as the only people who could dig it out of the ground, the dwarves' wealth and power swelled, and their ancient halls were grand beyond measure, as their architecture and stonemasonry was also unmatched. To say nothing of their works of enchantment.
Enchantment?
Yes.
Enchantment!
All of that ended with the Darkspawn. While the Darkspawn are only a problem for the world above during times of Blight, for the dwarves, the Darkspawn are just another fact of life. The Darkspawn flooded their halls, and like rats they bred in the darkness, spawning thousands upon thousands of their number that formed into a relentless tide. Little by little, the great cities of the dwarves fell, and the deep roads that once connected their great civilizations became infested with this new vermin. One by one, all the cities were taken, all but one, that being Orzammar, the last bastion of the once proud Dwarven Empire located within the Frostback Mountains. But what is it that drives the Darkspawn beneath the ground? What exactly do they do with their time when they're not charging across Ferelden, looking for betrayed kings to slay? Quite simply, the Darkspawn dig. The Maker was not the first god to be worshipped in Thedas, or in this world. Whether or not he truly exists, if he did actually create the world and its people, or if he's just the winner who gets to write the history books remains unknown. What is known is that the old gods are bound into the bodies of ancient dragons, and buried deep beneath the ground. Far deeper than even the dwarves have tunneled. These ancients sing to the Darkspawn. They call them relentlessly towards their entombed bodies, and once one is found, the Darkspawn inflict their taint upon the ancient deity, and create an archdemon. The will of the archdemon transforms the Darkspawn from a near senseless rabble into an organized fighting force, and it directs them to the surface to lay waste to the world that their ancient enemy rules over, and all the peoples therein. The Grey Wardens that our protagonist is very much a member of won their place in history when they slew not only the first archdemon, but the 3 archdemons who came after. The first Blight actually lasted around 200 years according to Dragon Age lore, with the subsequent ones being dealt with in progressively shorter time spans. Arriving in Orzammar, our plans to recruit the dwarves into our army are once again smashed up against a brick wall when we discover the king recently passed away and there's now an ascension dispute. A little of this is touched upon in the Dwarven origins story, but in Dwarven society the king gets to name his successor, and while this is usually one of his sons, it isn't always the case. I have a feeling someone may have been reading Game of Thrones prior to writing this section, because we have a situation where the king's third son Baldur, the other 2 having died under suspicious circumstances, feels he is the rightful next king of Orzammar, but prior to his death, the king was locked away with another noble named Lord Harrowmont. Harrowmont claims that on his deathbed, the king named him the successor. Unfortunately, he's having a hard time proving that, and the Dwarven Assembly is divided and deadlocked on which of the 2 candidates to endorse. While this is certainly a crisis, an opportunistic warden might see a fast track into a potential new king's good graces and first dibs on a few thousand heavily bearded, drunken berserkers to bolster his own army. But of course, there are hoops to jump through, and maybe a friend or 2 to help in the process. You could argue that the 2 candidates offer a progressive versus regressive dichotomy. Harrowmont is the conservative general who wants to keep the dwarven traditions and even further isolate the society from the world above to prevent outside influence from changing things. He's also a respected military commander and fighter, and that might be exactly what an enterprising warden needs considering the situation. Baldur, on the other hand, wants more trade with the outside world and seems interested in easing the restrictive caste system. He's also looking into the possibility of dissolving the assembly to appoint himself as unquestioned ruler, which is, well, it's a choice, that's for sure. Now, a caste system is a viable system if you don't have any kind of public education. If there's little to no chance that you'll have the opportunity to learn anything outside of what's present in your immediate environment, then survival dictates you pick up the family trade, learn from them, and carry it on. The main problem with the dwarven caste system, though, is the casteless. These dwarves are completely denied any opportunities in their society. They can't even join the army and go to die fighting the Darkspawn. They get to live in squalor and beg. So is it any wonder then that there is a massive organised crime syndicate in the Orzammar slums? We're actually tasked with clearing this out as part of the story arc here, but I don't see how this fixes anything. Okay, we take out the current leader of the Carder, and yeah, they're doing some pretty shitty stuff. But what choice do any of these guys have? Why would they want to play nice in a society that barely acknowledges they exist and refuses to give them any chance to have an even remotely better life? Of course they're going to strike back, and then use any means necessary to keep whatever they take. Rooting them out might solve the problem for a while, but it's not going to address the underlying social structures that create these problems. It's always going to come back. Maybe the dwarves need to take the money they spend on hiring mercenaries to murder criminals, and spend that improving the lives of the people in the slums and the social reform necessary to actually let the casteless earn a living legally to begin with. But I'm not here to change dwarven society. I'm a Grey Warden. I need an army. In my first playthrough, way back in the day, I actually sided with Harrowmont for this reason. As such, just for giggles, I decided to join Baldur this time, to see what was different. Regardless of who you choose though, it's all going to lead you to the deep roads in search of the last dwarven paragon. In dwarven culture, members who make significant contributions to their society can rise to the rank of paragon. A paragon could be a soldier who single-handedly stops an entire Darkspawn army, or an inventor who creates something that drastically improves the quality of life beneath the stone. So great are the contributions of these people that they are held up as living ancestors and practically worshipped by their peers. They are granted their own house and raised to the level of noble, even having a vote in the assembly. They will live on forever in legend as an exemplar of what a dwarf can achieve. So great is this honour that it even transcends the rigid caste system, meaning that even casteless dwarves could become paragons if they did something worthy of it. though how they'd ever get that opportunity is beyond me. For the most part though, they're either soldiers, smiths, or artisans. In the last 4 generations, only one paragon has been named, that being Branka the smith, who invented smokeless coal. She herself eventually took her entire family into the Deep Roads to locate the Anvil of the Void. This was the sacred artifact of another paragon named Caradin, and it was used to forge the dwarves' greatest weapon against the Darkspawn, their golems. She has not been seen since she departed, and is presumed by most to have fallen to the Darkspawn. That being said, the word of a paragon would carry immense weight in the assembly and easily end the stalemate. As such, the Warden and his team are tasked with heading into the Deep Roads to see if she's still alive and gain her backing for their candidate. This sees us entering what I can only describe as the game's mega dungeon, to battle a seemingly endless horde of Darkspawn and other nightmares. It gives us a first-hand view of just how vast the threat of the Blight is, and even lets us look upon the Archdemon for the first time. But since we're now on the topic of golems in Dragon Age, I think it's time we introduced Shale. The Stone Prisoner was Dragon Age Origins Day 1 DLC, and that should set some alarm bells off for all of you right there. This clearly isn't something made separately from the base game. It's not extra, it's something carved out to be sold back at a premium. But why? Game publishers have always had one boogeyman or another to blame for disappointing sales figures and other issues to justify shady tactics. Whether it's piracy or lies about increases in development costs, they've been looking for an excuse to wring every penny they can get out of their audience for decades. Back in the 2010s, pre-owned games were the thing that was definitely going to kill the games industry, despite a shocking lack of evidence to back that up. As such, various shitty tactics have been tried over the years to kill this market. Thanks to everything being digitally distributed these days, they've more or less succeeded, and the brick-and-mortar game store, much like Blockbuster, is a relic of a bygone era. Shale was carved out of the full release of Dragon Age Origins, but was available as free DLC if you bought a brand new copy of the game. People who bought it secondhand had to hand over an extra $15 to get it. If I were a betting man, I'd guess that the DLC literally sets a flag from false to true, and that the rest of the data for Shale's character and associated quests was always on the game disc in the first place. In terms of shady practices, especially for EA, this is relatively timid, but it was definitely a step in the wrong direction. These days, so much of a game's DLC is stuff that was, once upon a time, part of the original game. The phrase "it's just cosmetics" often gets thrown around when publishers try to justify their microtransactions, but cosmetics used to be part of the game and part of the fun. It was cool unlocking new outfits and using them in replays. It didn't change the game, but it felt like a nice reward for a job well done. So don't tell me it's just cosmetic. I want an unlockable cowboy hat for finishing a game, goddammit. Anyway, that rant aside, let's talk about Shale. Shale's questline begins when we purchase a golem control rod from a merchant at Sulcher's Pass. We also get told the command words to activate the golem, but we are going to have to hoof it all the way to the village of Honleith if we want to get this golem and do anything useful with these things. As is fashionable for this particular period in Ferelden's history, the village is overrun with Darkspawn, and the residents are nowhere to be found. Clearing the area and approaching the golem, we quickly discover that we've been duped, and that the activation word doesn't do a damn thing.
So, once again, I've been had.
Because of course, it couldn't be that easy for us, right? This leads us into a surprisingly spacious cellar, where we have to battle yet more Darkspawn, and eventually find several survivors, held up down here behind magical protection spells. It seems this building was once home to the mage that owned the golem, and the cellar was his personal laboratory. I wonder what the Templars thought of that. That mage isn't here anymore, on account of having his head crushed like a sparrow egg between Zangief's thighs.
When I hit bottom, I was crushing man's skull like sparrow egg between my thighs.
By his very own golem. We have one more hoop to jump through that involves a lost little girl, a demon, and a fairly basic tile puzzle, before we can get the true activation phrase from the mage's son and claim our new mobile battering ram. Because of some fairly excessive modification that's been done to her, Shale can no longer be controlled by the rod, but after decades of standing in one spot, staring out at the exact same place in the village, she's had something of a loss for a purpose in her life. Her memories have also faded considerably. She can be coaxed into coming along to crush Darkspawn skulls, exactly like sparrow eggs between Zangief's thighs, at least until a better offer comes along. Shale is an absolute scream. She has a wonderful dark sense of humour, and is not in the least bit shy about telling anyone what she thinks of them. Her banter with the other characters is some of the best in the game.
Shale, why do you refer to me as the Elder Mage?
Clearly because it is purple, and a hyena.
Though I think Morrigan and Leliana have her beat by just a little.
It should be cut low in the front, of course. We don't want to hide your features.
Stop looking at my breasts like that. 'Tis most disturbing.
She is a little hard to deal with in camp, as similar to Morrigan and Sten, she isn't one for smooth talking, and can be very blunt and tactless. If I'm being honest, this does add to her charm, as does the way she refers to the other characters as squishy fleshy things, and uses the pronoun it for us. She absolutely revels in the fact she murdered her previous master. It would seem the old wizard had no understanding that golems had anything like a personality, and were much closer to being slaves than automatons. Shale tells us that he used her for mundane tasks and to scare children so that he could have his privacy. He only ever referred to Shale as Golem, and simply decided to redesign her without any knowledge of what he might do, or even if she can feel pain. I'd probably want to crush someone's head too if I was treated like a household appliance by them. And she has a violent distaste for pigeons. In combat, Shale is an absolute powerhouse and a mainstay in any setup. Her skill sets are unique only to her, and enable her to fit into any party as a melee or ranged DPS character, a tank, and even a support character if you so wish. And the sheer stopping power she has is just terrifying. She has incredible area of effect melee attacks, as well as abilities that can stunlock entire groups. Her single target attacks also do devastating damage and cause knockback. This can be an issue if you've got a rogue behind her target, taking advantage of the extra backstab damage, but it's not too hard to reset. You may have noticed that I'm using female pronouns with her as well, and that's not because she sounds like an 80-something-year-old British great-aunt who's smoked about 40 cigarettes a day since she was 16. There is a major revelation for us to uncover about Shale and golems in the course of this adventure, and all will become clear when we finally reach the Anvil of the Void in the Deep Roads. But before we head down there, we have to meet Oghren. Bioware used the creation of their own world, with a tone unique to itself, to create some interesting cultures like the Canary, and do cool things with magic, demons, and even gods. The dwarves though, they're cool of course, but they are more or less what you'd expect. They are people of stone. This is reflected in their rigid caste system and conservatism. And when you think of dwarves in fantasy, you're expecting a heavily bearded warrior that attacks things with an axe, likes to drink, and maybe doesn't have a great deal going on upstairs. They might know a lot about hitting things, either enemies or hot metal, but they aren't philosophers or poets. And that's Oghren. Now that doesn't mean he's boring or annoying. No, not at all. Oghren is just fine, and I wouldn't have him any other way. But he is exactly what you'd expect from a dwarven fighter. His favourite gifts are alcoholic beverages of all kinds, he comes with the two-handed weapons and the berserker skill setup preloaded, he's vulgar and aggressive, and when he joins the Wardens in the Awakening expansion, he chugs the entire chalice of Darkspawn blood and doesn't notice anything at all. When we meet Oghren, he's a drunk and something of a public menace. These days, he's directing his displeasure at the nobles and the assembly for not mounting a serious search and rescue operation into the Deep Roads for his wife, the last paragon Branka. Interesting. If Branka took her entire household into the Deep Roads with her, why was her husband left behind? Well, it's because Oghren and Branka's marriage was more one of political convenience than one of love. In his youth, Oghren was a respected member of the warrior caste, who had no shortage of beauties swooning over him. One of whom, it could even be said, he fell in love with. but his family deemed that an equally talented member of the artisan caste was a much better match for Oghren, and pushed him into the Union. Things didn't improve when Branka became a paragon, and the head of her own household. It was too stressful for Oghren, whose talents lay in splitting Darkspawn skulls with his axe. Now, his arranged wife was more or less a living goddess in the eyes of her people. To cope with all these changes, Oghren took to drink, and became something of a familial disgrace by the time Branka decided to leave. It's a little weird. When Oghren talks about Branka, there seems to be some genuine affection there, and I think he feels both a sense of duty towards her, and a degree of self-awareness about what a disgrace he's become. When we are finally tasked with heading into the Deep Roads, the Angry Dwarf insists that things will go a lot smoother down there with him in the team than without. I was inclined to agree. Darkspawn killer a warden may be, but this is their home turf, and I wanted any advantage I could get down there. We'll pick up both Shale and Oghren's stories again a little later, but for now, let's talk about the Deep Roads. The Deep Roads are a big, and I mean really big dungeon that we need to explore to find Branka. It's made up of various dwarven settlements that are connected by great tunnels, and the enemies range from Darkspawn to fucking spiders and other subterranean inhabitants, which we can sometimes encounter actually fighting each other as well. One of the more interesting encounters down here is with members of the Dead Legion. These dwarves literally have a funeral for themselves, complete with the creation of a memorial when they sign up. All of them are considered dead from that moment on, and the soldier will simply stay in the Deep Roads fighting the Darkspawn until they meet their ultimate end. This is also where you'll make some serious bank. Dragon Age does a pretty good job of keeping your financial resources limited, and at the start of the game, you can routinely find high-level weapons and armor in various shops that you have absolutely no chance of affording. The Deep Roads is one place you can really change that situation though. Between the sheer volume of Darkspawn to fight, kill, and loot down there, and the absolute wealth of forgotten treasure hidden all over the place, you're going to be coming back to the surface, a damn sight richer than when you went down there, and it's entirely possible you'll be armed with considerably better weapons than the ones you find in the stores anyway. I'd advise investing in some backpacks before you go here, in order to expand the meager inventory space that you have. This dungeon was probably the first place that I got a little fed up with the combat too. It's not that the combat is bad. As we'll get into later, I think it's great and easily the best iteration of real-time with active pause combat I've seen in a game. But I think it works best when it comes in small to medium-sized bursts that are broken up with dialogue, shopping, and role-playing. Let's just say I enjoyed Denerim overall more than I did this area. There are some great side quests down here too. I especially liked the Topsiders Honor quest. Mechanically, it's little more than a fetch quest that sees you killing some fools who you were most likely going to kill anyway. But it's the story around it that makes it a little more interesting. It seems an elf decided he was going to end his life fighting the Darkspawn in the Dead Trenches alongside the Legion. While in this setting elves and dwarves don't have any specific issues with each other, he was an outsider, and initially, the Legion tried to chase him off to stop him from landing them all in trouble. That was until their first clash with the Darkspawn, where the elf proved his mettle and won the respect and acceptance of the Legion. When he finally fell, the dwarves honoured him, saying,
"The stone take this topsider, as she would welcome her own. He was born to the air and sky, but has served the Deep Roads better than a native son. Many will see another day, because he fought at their side and fell in their stead."
The loss of the Topsider's blade has the dwarves worried that his spirit will be restless, and we can reunite the pieces and return it to the grave. Like I said, there's nothing technically interesting about the quest, but the little story surrounding it elevated it beyond busy work to something I was invested in and wanted to see through to the end. Whichever writer conjured that one needs a pay rise. Oh wait, yeah, EA, so probably already been fired. So we battle and loot our way down into the depths of this blight-infested hellhole. But if the Darkspawn haven't presented themselves as a true existential threat by this point, all that's going to change when we meet the Broodmother. As we reach our goal, we start to see more and more masses of flesh, And then we meet someone. A dwarf woman who's been down here a very long time. One who is deeply sick with the taint, and whose mind has been broken from the horrors she's endured down here, and one very particularly terrifying thing that she's seen. You see, the Darkspawn, if they can help it, don't kill women. Instead, they are taken into the depths and fed corrupted Darkspawn flesh. This begins a transformation into something truly disgusting. This poor dwarf witnessed this happen to her kin, and was cursed with the knowledge that this would one day happen to her. That she would become a broodmother. This is utterly nightmarish. It's far worse than the fate of xenomorph victims. It's violation on an unimaginable scale, and really seals just how desperate the fight is to destroy these things utterly. However, as disgusting as this thing is, it's not the greatest evil we encounter down here in the dark. So what could be worse than what the Darkspawn have done here? Good old-fashioned ambition, mixed with a greater good fallacy. Go on, Koska. Say the line. No man capable of greater evil than one who thinks himself in the right. No purpose more evil than the higher purpose. This section is important for both Shale and Oghren's character development. For Oghren, there is the wonderful reunion with his beloved wife, who seems to be doing much better than the other surviving members of her house.
Oghren, it figures you'd eventually find your way here. Hopefully you can find your way back more easily.
Yeah, there's basically no love loss here. Worse still is the revelation that she allowed the Darkspawn to take the women of her house to turn into broodmothers. Why would she do such an abhorrent thing? Well, the Anvil of the Void is protected by a booby-trapped labyrinth set up by the smith Caridin. This is the last obstacle between her and her obsession. Branka initially just sent wave after wave of her own men in there to die, and when numbers grew thin and morale low, she had an ingenious idea. Send the Darkspawn in there. She let them make broodmothers of her people, commit what can only be considered the mother of all violations upon them, so they could keep pushing out meatbags to hurl at these traps. Of course, she justifies this by talking about the benefits of the golems, how one golem could save thousands of dwarven lives, and an army of them could even help them take back some of their lost empire. All of this suffering is a necessary sacrifice. It's all for the greater good. You ever notice how the people who preach this crap aren't the ones being sacrificed for it? And this clearly has a lot less to do with bettering the dwarves, and more to do with a mix of obsession, sunk cost fallacy, and pure sociopathy. Of course, we get to run this Last Crusade gauntlet for ourselves, and thanks to our protagonist powers, we even find ourselves wondering what the issue was. But that brings us to Caridin and the Anvil. Yep, the old dwarf paragon is still alive and... oh, that's a twist. Yep, golems aren't just constructs, they're actually dwarves. Caridin even recognizes Shale. She was a volunteer. What he tells her starts to shake memories free in that stone brain of hers. On the Anvil of the Void, the soul of a dwarf can be forged into the body of a golem. However, as this was an incredible sacrifice, it required volunteers to undergo the process. Volunteers who would lose their free will. When the king of the time began sending castless and criminals to become golems against their will though, Caridin did not want any part of it. And that's basically how he wound up on his own anvil. Caridin wants to destroy the anvil now. He has reflected on his choices and ultimately doesn't think that sacrificing the best of the dwarves to make golems was a fair trade for their benefits. But as a golem, he's incapable of touching the anvil now, and we can use this moment to highlight a few things. First thing is that while I feel there is definitely a better choice here, just as with all choices we make in Dragon Age, it's never clean cut. There will always be pros and cons. Even ignoring the morality of turning dwarves into golems that can be stripped of their free will, we still need a paragon to endorse a candidate, so we can get an army together to stop a very real blight right now. Golems would be a huge advantage in the current conflict, and Branka isn't exactly wrong about the benefits more golems could have to Orzammar. And what of all those who died or were subjected to much, much worse just to get here? Should their sacrifices now all be in vain? The price has already been paid after all. Could you destroy medical research that could save thousands, if not millions of lives, just because it was discovered in some concentration camp through torturous experiments on unwilling prisoners? That's a decision I hope I never have to make. A much easier choice to make, though, is respecting the wishes of a friend and an ally. We've already talked about the affinity system in this game and how it can swing in either direction based on dialogue choices, actions, and gift giving. There are also pivotal choices that will actually turn companions hostile against you and lead you to have to kill them. Shale stands with Caridon. Oghren, despite everything, doesn't want to harm Branka, but is willing to if it comes to it. To me, Branka is a criminal guilty of the worst possible crimes imaginable, and no amount of good intentions excuses her actions. Her crimes should not be rewarded, with her returning to Orzammar as a hero and getting to turn the dwarves into mindless slaves to kill Darkspawn. It was with great pleasure that I exacted justice and vengeance on her for all the suffering she created, and stole not only her life, but denied her dream of returning the golems to the dwarves from ever coming true. I only wish she'd seen me shatter the anvil before the light left her eyes, so she could know that all her struggles amounted to nothing. With Branka out of the picture, Caridon forged a crown that could be identified as his handiwork and act as his endorsement. A little flimsy, but it was good enough for me to turn an unpopular third son, who may have murdered his brothers, into a king and get the dwarves to commit to my fight. Shale ultimately remembers her life before being a golem, and we even travel to her former home in the Deep Roads together. She softens a lot on both myself and the party of fleshy meatbags she's with. She's not coming along because there's nothing better for her to do anymore, but because she wants to be here with us, making a difference. Oghren eventually opens up about an old flame of his too, and we eventually track her down, and yeah, it goes...
Well, you don't need to fight it right now, do you? I mean, you could have a pint first. You could call me a surly Bronto. I can tell you that you smell like nut droppings.
Like, what the hell just happened? Dwarves, am I right? Okay, let's get out of this mountain and go meet some elves. If Dragon Age's dwarves are pretty much what we expect from dwarves, then the elves are where the greatest subversion of expectations can be found. That's not to say we don't find elves living in forests with bows and arrows, and attempting to live a life in harmony with their environment. But their race and culture has been utterly broken by years of slavery beneath the Tevinter Magisters, and the destruction of their second homeland in an exalted march led by the Chantry. Much of their history, traditions, and identity have been lost, and there are now two distinct groups of elves. On one hand, we have city elves, who are those who submitted to human rule after their homeland was destroyed. On the other, we have the Dalish. These are nomadic tribes of elves who tried to hold on to what little there is left of their ancient culture. A Dalish tribe is generally led by a keeper, who is also a mage. Since the Dalish do not follow the Chantry and do not send their mages to the Circle, keepers are apostates in the eyes of the Chantry, and their disapproval, and the risk of Templar retribution, is one of many reasons the Dalish stay on the road. They also have a particular disdain for humans because, you know, like all the atrocities. So these elves are much less the wise, powerful, and haughty elves of Tolkien, and much more the suspicious and rightfully angry Scoia'tael from The Witcher. Our warden and his ever-growing posse of mismatched monster murderers finally come upon a Dalish camp in the outskirts of the Basilian Forest, and just like clockwork, their keeper Zathrian, voiced by Star Trek Voyager's very own Tim Russ, informs us that he'd just love to help us out with the Darkspawn, but unfortunately, blah 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 werewolf attack, blah 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 his people caught lycanthropy, blah 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 kill a big wolf to make a potion to cure it, and maybe they'll be in a position to help. So, if I'm being honest, while this quest does have a few interesting twists and turns, This whole area was probably the least interesting for me. You may be surprised to hear this, but I've never actually finished Knights of the Old Republic, and that's largely because of how formulaic the main quest locations become. You roll up into town, talk to every NPC you can, get all their quests, go into the dungeon area, kill basically everything, and then go back to the NPCs to either give them a dropped item or tell them that such and such is dead. You don't even have to be paying attention to what the people want or why. Just kill and loot everything, and you'll probably have it by the end. Now, I mentioned the Topsiders Honor quest before, and pointed out how an intriguing bit of writing can turn a mechanically simple fetch quest into something interesting. But I just wasn't hooked on what was being served in KOTOR. I promise I'll go back and try again at some point. Maybe something else was going on in my life at the time that had me in a more cynical and easily distracted place. Anyway, that was the vibe I was getting with this area. That's not to say it's bad. Even the worst parts of Dragon Age are better than a lot of games. But this felt less like a job I was invested in, and more like rolling up for a paycheck. That being said, the architecture and lighting in the ruins in the heart of the forest is quite spectacular, and we even have one of our first dragon battles here. I may be off base with this, but I think one of the reasons this area is less engaging for me is that we don't have a new companion with a personal stake in the matter to meet, as we did with Oghren, Wynne, and Shale in the previous areas. We do have an elf in our party, but we meet him under far less than favourable circumstances, and he's not only not Dalish, he's not even from Ferelden. He's actually an assassin sent to kill us, one of many we have to put to the sword. Lucky for him though, he's a damn sight more charming than the others. So why don't we take a moment to meet Zevran? Antivia is another country in Thedas with a culture of its own. The area is a busy trading port and quite famous for both wine and the exceptionally dedicated Antivian crows. These are an assassin's guild with a fierce reputation for always getting the job done, and once it becomes clear that the last Grey Wardens are marching all over Ferelden, putting right what once went wrong, Loghain decides to commission them to take care of the problem once and for all. And in their defense, they do set up a pretty good ambush for us. They just grossly underestimated their opponents and got themselves slaughtered to all but one elf. And he's a chatty little fellow at that.
Oh, I rather thought I would wake up dead, or not wake up at all, as the case may be. But I see you haven't killed me yet.
Zevran finds himself in an interesting position. Having failed in his assassination attempt, his life is forfeit to the crows. Basically, he could stand and charge the Warden now and die in combat, or leave the battlefield alive and meet his death one way or the other at the hands of his own organisation. Not much of a choice really. What he needs is a third option. What he needs, in his own words, is someone powerful enough to give the crows pause, and the Warden and his party have certainly demonstrated that. Ever the pragmatist, Zevran pleads his case to jump ship and begin a new life of killing people and Darkspawn for the Wardens rather than the crows. He lists a selection of useful skills that he can bring to the table.
Because I am skilled at many things, from fighting to stealth and picking locks.
As well as some less than useful ones.
I also know a great many jokes. 12 massage techniques, 6 different card games. I do wonderful at parties, no?
Though I am interested in those massages now that I think about it. There's every chance that this could be a ruse though. And he may simply be waiting for us to fall asleep so that he can slit our throats or slip poison in our drinks. Fortunately, I have a very faithful Mabari Warhound and a golem that doesn't sleep in my camp, so I took a gamble on him. In terms of gameplay, Zevran is a rogue who favours the two-weapon fighting path, which is exactly what I was, so I didn't really need him in my A-team. Once I'd got his affinity high enough for him to teach the assassin specialisation to my character, he wasn't bringing anything unique to the table either. You're much better either doubling up on mages, as no two mages bring exactly the same spells to the table, or getting a rogue who specialises in archery. Or, you know, just bring Shale. That didn't make him any less charming to have around though. Zevran's story is one of a Dalish woman who fell for a city elf and left her clan to be with him. The story ends with the city elf dying abruptly, thanks to the crows, and her working as a Lady of the Night to pay off his debts. That was how Zevran was brought into the world, and his mother was his first victim. She did not survive childbirth, and so the orphan was raised in the offices of this specialty business where his sticky fingers and quick feet got him noticed by a talent scout for the crows. They purchased him at quite the bargain price, and from that moment on, Zevran was a crow. Our elf doesn't resent his life though. All things considered, it could have been much, much worse for him. And the crows not only keep him supplied with wine, women, and men, but also give his life purpose. They encourage him to do what he does, and they praise him when he does it well. While he's not completely without morals, Zevran enjoys his work, and honestly couldn't see himself doing anything else. Now there's quite a story to unravel about Zevran and his time with the crows, but what we might think of as his companion quest takes place quite late in the game. The cell of the crows he works for aren't just going to give up on their target, or their wayward brother for that matter, and we are absolutely going to have to deal with them again eventually. Interestingly enough, there are another group of crows in Denerim whom we can procure work from if we choose. This isn't a problem, as each crow cell is responsible for its own contracts and cleaning up its own messes. The leader in this case makes it very clear that Zevran is already a corpse to him, and will waste no effort on him. And cooperating with them can even get us access to tools that may help us against Zevran's previous allies. If you haven't cultivated your affinity with Zevran by the time you stumble into this encounter, he may even switch sides again in hope of being taken back to the crows. But I'd charmed the charmer by that point, so it wasn't much to worry about. He's always a pleasure to talk to in the camp, and rarely judges the player for any of his actions. He's very easygoing, and one of the main gifts you can give him are Dalish gloves that we can find in the Basilian Forest. While Zevran considers himself an Antivian rather than an elf, he's grateful to receive something that has a connection to his mother. Of course, things with this quest aren't as clean-cut as we're led to believe. When are they ever? The werewolves have a side to this too, and they finally stop attacking us to invite us to come and hear it. These werewolves were created by Zathrian a long time ago. He cursed a group of humans who were responsible for the death of his family. He turned the spirit of the forest into a great wolf called Witherfang, who attacked and cursed the humans, and as his blood was used in the ritual, he gained immortality in with the deal. All this happened long, long ago, and those original humans have long since passed away, having lived out their lives as mindless, savage beasts. The werewolves of the Basilian Forest now are their descendants, or just people who were passing through and got caught in an attack. However, thanks to Witherfang, who was able to transform herself back into a forest spirit, they were able to fight back against their bestial natures and regain some kind of clarity, though they are constantly battling the beast inside themselves. The attack on the Dalish clan was actually a way to try to lure Zathrian into the forest and have him finally break the curse. They figured if they infected his people, then it would become his problem to fix. After hearing Witherfang out, and agreeing to go and speak to Zathrian, he just shows up in the ruins, which I have to say is very convenient. Time has not healed his wounds, however. It has only hardened his heart. No doubt what he suffered was unimaginable, and even centuries might not heal those hurts. But these are not the people who murdered his family. The sins of the fathers should not be paid by their sons or daughters. And there's clearly been collateral damage in with the mix, as many innocents travelling through these woods would likely have been attacked and cursed in kind. We fight with Zathrian and ultimately bludgeon some sense into him. He breaks the curse, and he and Witherfang depart this world forever. Whatever lies beyond the Fade, Zathrian, I hope it brings you more peace than this world ever did. We aren't quite done with elven culture yet, as we do need to take a look at city elf life. But for now, why don't we head to Redcliffe, save and all, and learn more about our best boy, Alistair. We can become aware of the fate of all Eamon of Redcliffe quite some time before we choose to go there, if we want to. It feels so tempting to head there first given how close it is to Lothering, but I actually made that mistake on my first playthrough and had a rough time with this section. We'll hear that all Eamon has not only fallen sick, but that this sickness is so severe that the Knights of Redcliffe have been sent abroad in search of the Urn of Sacred Ashes. This is nothing less than the Thedas version of the Holy Grail, an urn containing the ashes of the prophet Andraste, who was ultimately burned at the stake by the Tevinter mages for her rebellion. These ashes are fabled to be able to cure anything, so the Knights are trying to obtain a literal miracle in order to save him. Things must be desperate if relics so elusive as to be thought of as myth, even by the religion they belong to, are needed to fix this problem. Wish in one hand and shit in the other. See which one fills up first, I suppose. Arriving in Redcliffe, we find the keep off limits and the surrounding town in a state of disrepair. The situation is that the castle has been locked down for several days. There's no one patrolling the walls and no one responding to anyone shouting to them. Then, as of a few nights ago, undead horrors have been erupting from the castle to attack the town. While they were taken off guard on the first night, the residents have formed an organised resistance to beat the enemy back. They've united around the Chantry and are being organised by this guy, Ban Tegan, who's the Earl's brother, and for some reason, the only noble who wasn't in the castle when things went all house on the haunted hill there. They're all doing their best, but they suffer losses each night. If someone tries to flee the town, the monsters chase them down, and as mentioned, all of Redcliffe's knights are out in the world chasing fairy tales, like the cast of a Monty Python movie. So yeah, things are bad. Morale is low. People are suffering the losses of their families and loved ones. And it seems only a matter of time before their numbers dwindle out, and they are unable to mount any kind of resistance. Well, doesn't look like we're going to find any army to fight Darkspawn here. Better mosey on over to the next darling, and no, I can't abandon this place. Realistically, Eamon may be the only voice strong enough to oppose Loghain in Denerim, and, well, this place means a lot to our best boy Alistair, as prior to becoming a Templar, this was his home, and the All was basically the only family he knew. You see, Alistair has some secrets. Secrets that are very useful to our specific situation. One in particular that seems like too much of a coincidence. Almost like Providence. Shifty side eyes at Leliana. Before he was a Grey Warden, he was a Templar in training, and before that, he was a stable boy in Redcliffe, one whom all Eamon took great interest in, much to the suspicion of his wife. Alistair is a man who's been pushed around by people far more powerful than him for his entire life. Sometimes this happened with his knowledge, and sometimes without. For example, he had no particular desire to become a Templar. All Eamon's wife Isolde, a woman whom Alistair has no particular love for, bullied her husband into sending him away because she suspected that Alistair was the Earl's illegitimate child. Young Alistair was never some devout servant of the Chantry, and honestly didn't care for life as a Templar, but no one seemed to care much about what he thought about that. As such, his training went along with somewhat lackluster progress. That was until he was eventually scouted by Duncan, and while there were many better trained Templars to choose from, Duncan saw something in Alistair that the others didn't have. Certainly he saw that Alistair was unhappy in the Chantry, and as such, his potential would be wasted on a life he didn't truly want. Duncan's choice of Alistair was met with resistance from the Grand Cleric, leading him to invoke the Grey Warden's right of conscription to bring him into the fold. It makes you wonder if someone in the Chantry was overly keen on keeping one eye on the boy, and why. Well, Alistair comes clean about this before we enter Redcliffe. He explains that he isn't Eamon's illegitimate son, but King Maric's. He's Caelan's half-brother. If the resemblance wasn't obvious enough. He was sent off to Redcliffe to be kept secret and taken care of. This is very convenient, as a royal bastard, has a much stronger claim to rule than the father of a dead king's wife. When Alistair comes clean about all this, it's more just about clearing the air. He isn't interested in pressing his claim, and he doesn't even care for that side of his family. He just doesn't want secrets between him and someone he sees as a friend. Alistair has tremendous respect for Duncan. While Duncan didn't actually give him a choice about becoming a warden, he's one of the only people who saw how dissatisfied he was with life in the Chantry and seemed to actually care. On top of that, Alistair actually seems to enjoy his life as a warden. He views fighting Darkspawn as a far better cause than watching over mages and hunting down apostates. Similar to Kim Kisaragi in Disco Elysium, Alistair is kind of the warden's moral compass. He's quite a genuine and friendly guy who always has a snarky quip to drop into the conversation. He's also been in this mess more or less as long as you have, and while he is the senior and should be running things, he's very aware of his limitations in that department, which is why he chose to defer to the player. Plus, you know, it would suck if we just had to do everything he wanted to do all the time. As such, it's easy to want to keep Alistair happy. In this case, it's not just about game mechanics. I like the guy. I want him to like and respect me too, so I look out for him and behave in a way that he approves of, though it is actually quite fun when we get dialogue options that tease him, as he generally rolls with the punches quite well. Alistair's companion quest is also an interesting one. It's short and doesn't require us to do much more than visit a house in Denerim, but it's one that has significant impact on him for sure. Alistair believes that he actually has a half-sister, a girl who was born of the same mother as him. Since he never got to know any of his family, he is hoping to connect with her, and it doesn't go particularly well. Goldana explains that their mother died in childbirth, and while he was whisked away to be taken care of, she got to stay in Denerim and find out firsthand how hard life can be when there's no one to take care of you. She has no interest in connecting with Alistair. She only wants money to try to ease her burdens, as she now has 5 kids and works as a washmaiden to keep them fed. This experience is a little shocking to Alistair. While he probably didn't really know what to expect, this feels like the absolute worst case scenario for him, but he resolves to find some way to help her more in the future. There is actually quite a bit more to this tale than we discover in this game. I guess you could say it gets retconned later, but we'll tackle that when we become an Inquisitor. We aren't done with our best bro in this game yet, but we'll deal with that in the endgame section. For now, let's try and save this damn town. The Battle of Redcliffe is basically a stand your ground mission, so my least favourite kind. Waves of enemies come at you from the castle, and you have to beat them back. Depending on your actions in the lead up to this battle, you may or may not have several extra resources to access in the fight. Since all we can do is hold the line until our enemy runs out of bodies, you don't really want to tackle this one straight away, as you can get overwhelmed far too easily. While Dragon Age Origins has a scaling difficulty that allows you to basically tackle the chapters in any order you want, having access to higher damage weapons, more coin for healing poultices, and Wynne to back you up is going to make this go much smoother, as there's no chance to recover between waves. With the town secured, it's time to sneak into the castle and discover what the hell is going on here. But not before we get another surprise.
Tigan, thank the Maker you yet live.
Isolde.
Isolde explains that something evil has infested the castle. Something unleashed by a blood mage. Ugh, not these guys again. Honestly, it's a wonder demons tried to corrupt the innocent at all, when there seems to be a near endless supply of fools looking to sign on the dotted line. Isolde can't say too much though. It seems she's been released on probation and instructed to bring Tegan back to the castle as quickly as possible, and there are people in there still held hostage. None of this sounds like an especially good idea, but Tegan goes ahead, hoping he can be some use, and we take the opportunity to slip in through the back door faster than an immersive sim protagonist who just found an air vent. In the dungeons of Redcliffe, we find the mage who, apparently, caused all this locked up, and if you happen to be a mage, you'll have done the Circle origin story, and you'll recognize this guy, and oh very yes, he's a blood mage, but not exactly a bad guy. He was falling behind in his studies and basically tried to give himself an edge by doing the mage equivalent of taking steroids with much worse side effects. He was also having a forbidden affair with a Chantry initiate, and to top it off, he's caught wind that the Circle plans to make him tranquil without consent. If you're familiar with the Wheel of Time saga, you'll have heard of being gentled or stilled. It's a process that cuts a magic user off from the source. It's usually done to males, as the male half of the magical source in that setting was corrupted and eventually drives the practitioners mad. Tranquils are cut off from the Fade. This actually strips them of their dreams and emotions, as well as magical power. Some apprentices volunteer for this, but it can be forced upon others if the Circle deems them too much of a long-term risk for possession. Their emotionless demeanor make them perfect for handling lyrium for enchantment.
Enchantment?
Yes.
Enchantment!
But it also makes him the equivalent of a magical eunuch. This leads to an escape plan that doesn't go well for anyone, and ends with the player getting recruited by Duncan, and Johan here running off here to cause more trouble? Well, yes, but not in the way you think. You see, Isolde didn't tell us the whole story. The Chantry and its laws on magic trump any authority in Thedas, and having mages in your family can also be seen as something of a stain on your bloodline. Mages are taken from families and stripped of land and title regardless of their parentage, and it turns out that Emond and Isolde's son is a mage. Rather than do the lawful thing and have him shipped off to the Circle for training, Isolde hired an apostate to teach her son how to hide his gifts. To conceal, not feel. Don't let them know. Well, now they know. And yeah, demons. I was going to say something snarky about how the rules don't apply if you've got the money, but, well, there are clearly some consequences going on here. Oh, and Johan also poisoned the Arl at Logain's request, which is an important detail. Johan seems genuinely regretful of his actions. Like, he's not just upset that he's been caught, he really understands how far he's fallen to have been so easily manipulated by Logain. He insists he didn't actually summon the demons though, and thinks the boy Connor is the one who might have torn the veil. We have options for dealing with Johan, but ultimately we have to face Connor, and after overpowering his guards, including a Revenant, which, I mean, this one is easier than most of them, but holy crap, you do not want to take this thing on without a healer. We are left in a pickle. Connor is very much possessed, but we can't exactly fix that problem by putting a sword through him. His undead hordes, at least for now, have been subdued, and he's run off to his room to, I don't know, think about what he's done? This leaves us with some choices. Johan can get us into the Fade, where we can get that demon out of the boy's system. The problem is, that kind of ritual usually takes a few gallons of lyrium, but he could do it using blood magic. He'd just need all of someone's blood to do it. The other option is to rush off to the tower to get help. If you look at the world map, it seems clear that Bioware wants you to come here first, get messed up in this, and organically rush off to the Mage's Tower and clear up their problems before you come back to deal with things here. But, you know, we have guides and past experience to draw on these days. The problem with this choice is there's a very real consequence to killing Isolde to save her son, especially when you consider we're here to get Eamon on our side. It's implied that we may have only limited time before Connor regains his power, or something else happens to his soul. But there are absolutely no negative consequences to sallying off to the tower and coming back with the mages and lyrium, and going into the Fade without murdering anyone. Which is odd. Why even give us this loaded, morally questionable option on one hand, and a completely free pass to not do that on the other? Saving Connor, we discover that he was trying to help his father. Since Eamon is in a coma and dreaming, his son could find him in the Fade, and he struck the deal with a demon to try and save him. While he is well and Johan will be returned to the tower to face his justice, Eamon is still out of commission, and it seems like the Urn of Sacred Ashes is still the only viable solution to this problem. I mean, why not? all things considered, finding an artifact that may not even exist isn't exactly making our situation any more difficult at this point. Impossible is apparently what we do now. So I guess we need to go find a miracle, and maybe while we're at it, we can do the one thing that truly sets the men apart from the boys in the world of adventures. We can slay a dragon. Prior to taking on this leg of the quest, I'd begun steadily draining Denerim of coin and content, and believe me, there is a lot of content here. The capital city can be visited any time after leaving Lothlorien, but for role-playing reasons I decided not to hike straight into Loghain's territory while the place is still in uproar about what I apparently did. If the deep roads are where you get most of your loot, and the tower is where you get your healer, Denerim is side quest central. Here you'll be met with multiple job boards that refresh their supply of quests at multiple times, and keep you supplied with a steady stream of bottom tier fetch quests to go out and deal with. Sometimes you'll have to go to a special one-time location on the map for them, and sometimes a quest will just spawn someone in the city for you to deal with, but they generally fall under the go to X location and kill Y person category. There are these interesting burglary gigs we can take, but for reasons we'll talk about when we cover the combat later, these don't amount to much in execution. We spend most of our time in the Denerim Market District. This isn't some Oblivion Imperial City scale location. It's much more symbolic than that. The size of the city is implied by all those houses just beyond the borders that we can't pass, and Denerim's own minimap that covers us walking between districts. Not every quest is done on a transactional basis though. The Black Vials, for example, aren't handled through an actual quest, and there are no markers anywhere on any of the maps for them. You just stumble into them and wind up face to face with a Revenant. These are some of the most powerful enemies in the game, and require careful positioning of your characters, as their massive sword swings can damage multiple allies, and straight up one-shot one of your unarmored mages if you make the mistake of getting them too close. We encounter these guys guarding several mysteries around Ferelden, and they can easily yeet your party if they take you by surprise, and if you stumble onto one early on, you may be better off reloading your save and coming back much later. There's multiple hours of content here that sees you revisiting a lot of areas to take care of business. It's not essential, of course, but it will contribute to your gold, your XP, and helps to flesh out the world. Sure, there's a Darkspawn Blight marching its way slowly across the realm, devouring everything in sight, but it's business as usual until the enemy is literally beating down your doors, and, assuming anyone survives this, it'll all be business as usual afterwards. Andraste is a person who exists in both history and legend in Ferelden. Within the larger Dragon Age canon, there is quite a lot of information about the actual person who led the first Exalted March and broke the back of the then weakened Tevinter Imperium. It's the same as how we know Alexander the Great was real and an undefeated general, but he very likely wasn't a son of Zeus. As mentioned before, the first Blight lasted around 200 years. It was caused by the ruling Magisters doing something in the Fade, and even after the Grey Wardens arose to slay the first Archdemon, Dumat, the Empire was still greatly weakened after that. This led to no end of new troubles within the Imperium, with slave uprisings, famine, and general civil unrest. It was a prime moment for a charismatic leader who seemingly understood the real troubles of the most neglected members of society to offer a real alternative to the status quo and capture the hearts and minds of everyone who listened. A message that could travel much further and be held up so much higher if it seemed to come from divinity itself. According to Chantry scripture, the Maker had turned his back on the world for 200 years after the beginning of the first Blight, but it was Andraste's song that caught his attention and made him look back. He spoke to her and taught her the Chant of Light, and bid her spread it across the world that it might be redeemed and he might finally return to his chosen people. In scripture, she is known as the Bride of the Maker. Whoever this woman actually was, and whatever actually happened, The results were the breaking of the Tevinter Empire, the liberation of Ferelden, Orlais, and the Elven slaves, and the establishment of the Chantry as the major religion within these nations. Andraste herself is said to have been betrayed to the Imperium and burned at the stake, but not before the flame of the religion she had founded had already become a wildfire. After her execution, her ashes were brought to and hidden in Ferelden, the supposed land of her birth. And while numerous scholars have tried to locate her resting place, their failure led to the Chantry declaring it a myth, though just like with the Holy Grail, that hasn't exactly stopped people from searching for it on their own dime, and one person believed to be very close to a breakthrough was a Chantry scholar named Brother Genetivi. Things start to seem amiss in this part of our adventure when we enter Genetivi's house and find his assistant acting...
Us? I mean me. There is no us.
Very suspicious. And when it's quite clear we aren't buying what he's selling, he decides on a more physical approach to dissuading us. This eventually leads us to the village of Haven in the Frostback Mountains. I get the feeling we were supposed to have some kind of Wicker Man style experience here, where we walk around the town with everyone acting suspicious and saying things with obvious double meanings, while they give us shifty side eyes and get upset when we question their religious traditions that don't quite conform to the rest of Ferelden. Unfortunately, I spoiled this part of the game for myself by charging into the first house that I saw, finding the body of a Redcliffe knight, and some kind of weird altar, and then turning the entire town hostile against me. Certainly, they could handle a solitary knight, but me, I had a Shale on my side. Rescuing Brother Genetivi and ascending the Frostback Mountains, we discover an ancient and quite majestic temple that has been partially reclaimed by the mountain, and is buried in the snow. Wading through far more cultists than there are houses in the village below, we start to realize that these people are actually worshipping a dragon. We get assailed by recently hatched dragonlings and majestic drakes, and even find dragon eggs placed on altars like sacred relics of the religion. Before we get to the top though, we get stopped by this cult's leader, a guy named Colgrim, who has an offer to make. And frankly, this is one of those things I wish there was less of in games. Up to this point, Dragon Age has done a good job of having interesting plot twists and giving me a wide variety of morally dubious options for dealing with more or less every problem I've encountered. But the whole, well, you've slaughtered most of my people, and clearly you're a very capable warrior, so let me make you an offer, line is very annoying. Who the hell does this? Dude, I slaughtered nearly all your people. If you don't care about that, I sure as hell aren't going to trust you with my paycheck. The opportunity to hire me to do your dirty work passed about 50 corpses ago. You don't turn cultists and drakes on my boy Alistair, and then when we're done slaughtering them and you're basically out of bargaining chips, act like it was all just a test to see if we were competent. You're like one of those internet trolls who says seriously offensive shit because they actually mean it, but then retreats to, just jokes bro, when you're called out for being a shithead. So no, I didn't take him up on his offer in case you were wondering. Atop the mountain though, we see the real cause of the trouble. Elder dragons are quite rare at this time, but they still exist and represent the strongest enemies in the game. Drinking dragon blood can grant someone special powers, and might also addle their brain somewhat. You know, it might make them think that this majestic beast is actually the true reincarnation of their messiah. We are going to deal with her, but first, between Caridon's trap mage and what we have to deal with to get the urn, it's safe to say that somebody working at Bioware around the time this game was made is a big fan of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The riddles section is pretty easy, even if you haven't been reading all the codex stuff. But this bridge puzzle here? Torture. Just check a guide, it's annoying. But we impress the champion and get the ashes. The real moral conundrum here though is Brother Genetivi. He's very excited about his discovery, and is all in on sharing it with the world. So this once peaceful place of rest can become the Chantry equivalent of a theme park, with sickly pilgrims risking life and limb to cross these dangerous mountains and imbibe a pinch of Andraste's ashes that it might heal all of their ills. In truth, it's going to happen anyway. No secret can be kept forever, and I'd skewered more than enough people for one day. well, I do need to take care of that dragon, I suppose. Since we've slain one dragon, I guess it's time we slay another. And by that I mean, we're going to make nice with the Witch of the Wilds. Or try anyway. Morrigan isn't exactly cold-hearted or evil, but she's been brought up beyond the borders of civilization and raised to appreciate the laws of nature. She believes in survival of the fittest, and sees no reason to carry around and care for those who can't take care of themselves. Relationships are transactional to her. You get something from her, and she gets something from you. She is not without empathy, but she's lived a life of hard lessons often administrated by her mother. Flemeth taught Morrigan to be distrustful of society. The practical side of this is because they are both apostates, and she is something of a legend who'd rather not be disturbed, but she also wanted Morrigan isolated. As such, our apostate witch isn't well versed in social graces, and isn't one to get too close or intimate with others. She also covets the acquisition of strength and power above all. One of the gifts we can give her is an ornamental mirror. She tells us a story of how in her youth, she had become fascinated by a beautiful, wealthy lady, whom she had seen passing through the wilds, and stolen one of her mirrors for herself. This had become young Morrigan's special treasure, and perhaps a point of vanity for her. When Flemeth found out about it, she shattered the mirror and berated Morrigan for risking discovery over a shiny trinket that granted her nothing of substance. Having spent more time in the wilds with the animals, Morrigan can now take their shapes, and has the Shapeshifter talent pool. This makes her unique as a mage, as she can transform into a bear or a wolf to aid in the thick of a melee. But it's not a skill set I find myself using often, as her spells are far more useful overall. At camp, Morrigan sets up her tent far away from everyone else, with her own fire, and isn't all that happy the first time you wander over to check in on her. It's pretty easy to tell from her dialogue as well that this is more than just she prefers her own company. She really doesn't want to chance forging meaningful bonds with anyone, as she views them as a sign of weakness, and quite possibly a point that someone, most likely her mother, could strike at. Morrigan's respect can be won over just like any other companions, and that can be the first step towards her internal walls finally coming down. Her companion quest begins when we find Flemeth's grimoire, or at least some version of it, in the Mage's Tower. As she studies it, Morrigan eventually discovers the secret of Flemeth's long life and how the myth of many witches of the wilds was formed. Flemeth has actually had many daughters, and they all met the same fate at her hands. Flemeth extends her life by stealing her daughters' bodies. In order to escape this fate, she asks the Warden to face Flemeth in battle, and that isn't something you should try to take on early, as Flemeth's powers of shapeshifting far exceed Morrigan's. Yeah, remember when we asked Morrigan how Flemeth had rescued us from the watchtower at Ostagar?
She turned into a giant bird and plucked the two of you from atop the tower, one in each talon.
Ultimately, Morrigan doesn't believe that actually slaying Flemeth will be the end of her, but it may give her enough time to study Flemeth's true grimoire and prepare for if she ever did come and try to steal her body. When we hand her the book, she's actually shocked, not only because we were strong enough to overpower Flemeth, but just for the fact that we were even willing to try. As someone unaccustomed to things like trust and friendship, she didn't expect anyone to ever stick their neck out so far for her. She's never had someone do anything for her who didn't want something in return. This is also one of the chances you have to initiate romance with her. And going off my memories of my first playthrough, that does not go well. I know it might seem noble to want to save the damaged goth girl and find the soft and yielding center beyond the prickly exterior, but she eventually gets cold feet about intimacy and tries to shut the whole thing down. And frankly, she has other plans. Plans that don't include a happy ever after with her lover. We are on the cusp of the endgame. I know we've basically been doing spoilers all the way through the previous sections, and also handling some of the technical gameplay stuff along the way too, But let's hold off on exposing the final acts until we've cleaned up a few things about the game engine first. The Eclipse engine was custom made for this game. It was only ever used for the creation of this game and its sequel, and its graphical fidelity wasn't exactly something to write home about even when Origins came out. Now, I generally favour good art direction over pure graphical fidelity, and in that regard, Dragon Age Origins still looks great even now. But when you see this side by side with other games of the era, even Mass Effect which came out prior to this game, it already looks kinda dated. These textures all look very flat. There's very little normal mapping going on to fake depth. We've got heavy armor sets that have pieces clipping through them, and while we don't have fog or mist concealing the far off horizon, it's not like there are any mountains we can climb to stare out across vast landscapes and sweeping vistas. Then there's the NPCs. They just stand around and occasionally emote. Almost none of them have any patrol routes, and there's certainly nothing like a day or night cycle that sees characters coming and going about their day. Also, there's a lot of stock gestures the characters use in conversations. This was par for the course back then, but it stands out replaying it now. Doubly so when you see the same gestures in the sequel. As we talked about with Denerim, the size of our playing areas are relatively small and mostly symbolic. None of this is exactly bad. Well, the NPCs could stand to be a little more lively, I think. But we definitely had seen better on the market at this time, even by this very studio. Dragon Age Origins has a kind of stylized fantasy theme going for it. This was brought about partly due to hardware limitations, but also art direction. Like, have you ever noticed how a lot of old 3D games, even those set in modern settings, have these oversized doorways? Well, that's a collision issue. Collision geometry had to be a lot simpler, so it was better to have larger portals in general to prevent issues, especially with NPC pathfinding. This is offset by making more or less everything a little larger than life, and a little on the crooked side. It's by no means at the level of Torchlight or World of Warcraft, but it's not like The Witcher, which was doing its best to look a lot more realistic and a lot dirtier at the time. Areas like Denerim and the Basilian Forest are probably the least interesting visually. Every fantasy setting has a forest and a city that looks like it's from medieval Europe. But it's the ruins and ancient temples that are the real highlight of the game.
But Arkham, doesn't every fantasy RPG have ancient ruins and lost temples too?
Yes, they do. And they're all far more interesting than Ye Olde Town. And it's here we'll find things more unique to the cultures of this world. The vast corridors and cavernous deserted towns of the Deep Roads all have the dwarven signature architecture. It's that hard angled look that we see in Orzammar. That city is quite the spectacle unto itself, constructed around a vast molten lake as it is. I can't help but wonder what a people as short as the dwarves are doing crafting tunnels big enough for a dragon to go stomping through. But who can actually know the minds of the people of stone? In the Basilian ruins and the Temple of the Urn, I love all the grand architecture, and the use of god rays to show light streaming in through cracks and holes in the ceiling, to both illuminate areas and create a sense of wonder. It's especially cool to see how the forest has started to reclaim the ruins there, a process no doubt sped up by having a manifestation of the spirit of the forest living within them. One area that really stands out to me though is the creature design. Dragon Age swapped out the standard orcs and goblins of classic Tolkien-esque fantasy for their much more disgusting Darkspawn. These things have pale, rotting skin and cancerous growths on them. I could see a horror game happening set in Ferelden about a bunch of peasants or merchants slowly being stalked and picked off by just one of these things. The animalistic sounds they make are also very disturbing. While the sight of an orc or goblin could place you in any one of a dozen high fantasy settings, you need only take one look at a Darkspawn, and you know, this is Dragon Age. The spirits and demons also stand out a mile. The Desire, Rage and Sloth demons all do a good job of communicating what they're about with their designs, and along with the Shade are somewhat iconic for the series. I'm not sure what the Pride demon represents if I'm being honest. I mean, it's a big cool looking monster for sure, but it doesn't say pride to me. I always preferred the representation of the Fallen as a beautiful naked man rather than a horned monster. Beauty is tempting and deceiving after all. Regardless of all that though, I just appreciate that Dragon Age's demons aren't just big muscular dudes with bat wings and horns. They come from the realms of dreams after all, so their design can be built around dream logic. The UI is also cool. We get this nice leather-bound journal-style UI that lets us flip through its pages to check out our character's stats and setup, as well as explore our inventory, and everything down to the text and font size oozes fantasy adventure with it. If I have one big criticism though, it's the lack of good drip in this game. Now, the heavy armoured warriors do get a few decent looking sets, especially that Blood Dragon set, but even then, there's actually a very limited number of armour meshes, and it's clear many of these sets are just texture swaps, and in some cases colour variations of previous sets. Light armoured characters and wizards, on the other hand, get nothing worth wearing to a party. Like, what the hell are these hats? Give me a cowl or a pointy hat at least, for the love of the maker. While we're at it, how about a hood for my rogue and some black leathers with bandoliers wrapped around them? There's a whole subquest focused around making special Drake and Dragon scale armour, and just look at this. This is the regular studded leather armour, and Wade's Drake skin armour, and here's the superior version. Notice something?
They're the same picture.
I don't need a leather skirt for my fantasy assassin, I need Garrett's Thief reboot outfit, or something with a trench coat. Well, that might be asking a lot, as cloth physics on clothes would probably have been above the memory budget for the 360 and PS3. That's also why we don't get any capes to wear. Oh, since we're complaining, I've got to point out the dwarf beard mess. Now clearly this was a choice to stop the beards clipping through the character's body when they turn their heads. The original Witcher did something similar, but bloody hell it looks weird. So it's not without its failings, but there are still plenty of little details that I quite like, such as how much blood generally gets splattered all over our party in a fight. And hey, why not? We kill a lot of people.
I just had to kill a lot of people!
The engine served its purpose well enough though. It allowed combats where multiple player characters would engage large groups of enemies, with friend and foe alike firing off various spells and abilities, and cluttering up the screen with animations and effects. And let's not forget that this game ran on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. And while we were all very impressed with those consoles back in the day, there were still a lot of limitations with these two compared to the power of PCs at the time. So if the trade-off for getting it all running smoothly was some technically less impressive graphics, I'd say the trade is fair. But graphics alone do not a great game make. And while I still feel this game has aged rather well visually, it's the story and epic battles that people truly remember about their time playing it. So why don't we talk a little about that? From the previous section, I think you can see that a massive part of Dragon Age's gameplay is handled through exploration and conversations through dialogue trees. And I don't think I need to say much more on that topic, so let's focus on the combat. The combat loop is one of the most critical elements of the game. While there certainly are quests that can be resolved with a high persuade skill and a few coins placed in the right hands, the simple fact is, most of the problems in Ferelden at this time can be resolved by 4 highly specialized individuals entering a large area full of enemies and smashing them into pulp before looting everything of value they have on them, or that's found in the immediate surrounding area. If only all political struggles could be resolved in such a manner. Dragon Age uses an evolution of the real-time with active pause combat system that pretty much every major Bioware RPG has used since they made Baldur's Gate back in 1995. This was considered an essential component for creating the ultimate callback game. In fact, in developer interviews, I read that some builds of the game were sent back with the criticism, "We don't need to pause during the combat," and that was a problem. Essentially, when the fight kicks off, all the characters will launch into battle, usually attacking their nearest foe with whatever weapon they have to hand. At any time during this frenzy, the player can tap the pause button to survey the battlefield, direct certain characters towards certain enemies, reposition characters to better exploit their talents or keep them out of danger, and instruct them to fire off their special attacks, drink down potions, or even slip into the shadows to get the drop on an enemy when possible. After that, they can unpause the game and watch a few more seconds of the chaos unfolding, before pausing it again and issuing new orders based on how the battlefield has changed. I recall reading somewhere, during my research into the development of Planescape Torment, that this was a compromise to allow for team-based D&D style combat that had the feel of playing a fast-paced ARPG like Diablo. though I can't actually find the source I had on that at the time of writing. Last year, after finishing Planescape, I actually decided to replay Baldur's Gate with a view to cover the whole series here. That didn't pan out when, after several sessions, I finally realized I was having an absolutely miserable time. You see, Baldur's Gate uses the rules of 2nd edition D&D, a system that is not at all designed for adventures with video game levels of combat. Yes, characters need to fight to level up in the tabletop game, but not this much. Not by a long shot. So the desire to have gameplay with a Diablo feel meant ramping up the amount of fights characters would have to deal with in a day, and then significantly lowering the XP those fights granted in order to offset the changes and prevent the players from maxing out their character levels early on. However, no changes to class hit points, spell allowance, or even how characters are able to heal between fights were implemented to balance things on the player's side. What this meant was my party was constantly dying, while my mages were all but useless slingshot users with only 2 to 3 spells a day to handle hordes of enemies. Enemy mages, on the other hand, were usually higher level than the player character and would just unload their entire arsenal of spells on the party in a few seconds, because it's not like they had to think about fighting another 10 more groups of hobgoblins that day. It's a classic case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and I honestly cannot recommend this game to anyone who doesn't already hold strong feelings of nostalgia for it. On top of that, the combat just looks like a clusterfuck. Rogues are able to do extra backstab damage, for example, but how can you really be sure you're in the right position with a camera pulled this far out looking at a small collection of animated pixels? Things got a lot better with the original Knights of the Old Republic, as Bioware now had their own system that was built from the ground up for a combat-heavy video game, and transitioning into full 3D made enemy and ally positions read much more clearly, and things only got tighter and more refined with Dragon Age. So, to begin with, magic and special skills are now on a cooldown system to prevent spamming, and their only real limitation is the use of mana or stamina. As discussed already, lyrium is the secret sauce that makes magic magic. Lyrium potions can be found and bought all over Ferelden, and down to refresh your mage and bring them back into the fight, if they burn through all their mental energy in a fight faster than I burn through my tolerance for other people at parties. Physical characters aren't so lucky, at least not until we get to the Awakening DLC. They have a stamina gauge to limit the use of their abilities, and once it's burned out, all they can do is perform regular attacks until they build up enough stamina to fire off one of their active abilities again. Health, stamina, and mana also completely regenerate between fights, meaning that each time we face a fresh wave of enemies, your party will be fully recovered and ready to throw down. The only exception here is for injuries. If a character is KO'd in a fight, they will get back up once the enemies are cleared out, but will have an injury, which will give them a debuff. To remove these, you either need to burn through an injury kit, or head back to camp. As such, the devs could go absolutely overboard with the sheer volume of enemies in a wave, and the total number of enemies within a dungeon. There is still a degree of resource management here, as health and lyrium potions cost money to buy, or need to be crafted to keep you in peak shape mid-fight, and vendors only have a limited stock of these available. Fortunately, similar to Resident Evil 4, the random drops you find on defeated enemies often include potions that you're running low on. Leveling up your character, you'll see that with the exception of stealth and lockpicking, all the abilities you can buy for your class and specializations are used exclusively in combat. These can be separated into 3 categories: passives, sustained, and activated. Passives are an RPG staple, and easily the most useful abilities you can buy for any character. Passives are a permanent bonus to a particular skill or style of fighting, and only need to be bought once and never paid for again. Sustained abilities for combat classes are things like battle stances or styles of fighting, while for mages they could be shields or auras that radiate constant buffs or debuffs. They work similar to passives in that once you switch them on, they'll stay with you until you switch them off. Doing so depletes a chunk of your mana or stamina that will not be restored to you until the power is turned off. So if we look at Adan here with full stamina, and now I turn on my sustained 2-weapon fighting skills, and you'll see that my stamina won't recover all the way to maximum until I switch it off again. It implies some level of concentration to sustain the current mode. You can have as many of these active on your character as you want, or at least until you run out of stamina or mana to activate any more. And while you could be pretty powerful by doing that, you're going to miss out on all those fun, activated abilities. Activated abilities are where the real fun is. These are your big, flashy attacks and most explosive spells. They're all about big damage and crowd control. These powers have a single activation cost every time you activate them, but these are what enable you to really dominate the battlefield. For a few examples here, let's jump over to our best lady Wynne. While she's a spirit healer and a lot of what she does is about taking care of the troops, it's pretty easy to have her play a big part in battlefield control. I routinely got in the habit of having her drop glyphs of paralysis on the ground in front of dangerous enemies, and glyphs of repulsion at her own feet, to send any enemies who took an interest in her flying back the way they came. I'd also have her send fireballs into groups of archers. Since these guys are all standing still and shooting, it can be quite easy to catch a large group of them with this thing. This knocks them to the floor and sets them on fire, meaning they are unable to attack for a moment while they stand back up, they take a big hit of damage from the actual blast, and also have to deal with sustained damage from being on fire for several rounds. Adarn too played an important role here, as skills like Riposte and Dirty Fighting can stun enemies, and take them out of the fight long enough for the rest of the team to thin out the enemy numbers. So you can see there's a lot that goes into these fights. You aren't just selecting all your party members, telling them to wail on one particular enemy until he dies, and then moving on to the next. You're using your abilities and skills to overpower much larger groups of enemies. You're having your tanky warriors draw the attention of the biggest hitters, so that your DPS rogue can clear out their adds before sneaking up behind them to do extra backstab damage. You're using your mage to debilitate and break up large groups of enemies, and quickly eliminate enemy mages who can do the same to you, while keeping your own people alive, refreshed, and buffed in order to dish out the biggest damage. There's a big variety of skills that offer a broad range of strategies that you can bust out for different situations, and you can take the load off some of this decision making by playing around with your party's AI as well. Looking at the character AI, the game actually has the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII. I've got a video covering it here if you're interested. For the purposes of this game though, every character has a number of tactics slots. These work like really simple programming. Moving from the top of the list down to the bottom, you create a simple if statement with a condition, a target, and an action. An easy one to use for a warrior might be something like, if health is lower than 30%, drink a health poultice. Within the list of possibilities, we can even choose between a stronger or weaker one, making this quite the versatile system. We can create loadouts that state conditions under which certain sustained abilities are used over others, or which kinds of attacks we use when certain types of enemies are at certain ranges. With Final Fantasy XII, understanding this system was absolutely critical to finishing the game, and having anything resembling fun in the process. This was because your characters came with a couple of pre-installed gambits, and the rest were up to you to figure out. However, in Dragon Age, very often buying a new ability will cause it to slot into a tactics slot without you doing anything. In a couple of cases, I specifically had to switch a few off. Quite a few times, for example, if I left Shale in her ranged combat mode, and took control of another character, she'd just lob a boulder into a crowd of enemies regardless of whether or not a party member was nearby to be caught in the blast. That one may have been my fault now that I'm thinking about it, but there were other characters who I noticed were gassing out very quickly, because they were switching on all their sustained abilities the moment a fight started, and engaging enemies with less than 50% of their total stamina. The takeaway here is that while you don't have to build custom tactics loadouts for all your characters, it's worth checking in there now and then to see what their default AI has them prioritizing in battle. Because of the pacings of the battles though, you don't need to get this absolutely perfect. The quick pause and character switching makes it very easy to redirect characters and change their actions, far more so than in Final Fantasy XII, which I could only imagine being a complete nightmare to play if you had to micromanage every character's actions. Incomplete actions can be abandoned for new ones easily in Dragon Age, and everything is available on that little MMO-style hotbar at the bottom of the screen. So if your mage is about to cast a big attack spell, but your tank suddenly takes a massive amount of damage from an enemy, simply clicking the heal spell will see the mage abandon their previous spell to cast the new one. It's the same if you want to reposition them around the map. Click where you want them to go, and they'll drop what they were doing up to that moment and hightail it over there. That seems like a good moment to segue into the tactical view. The tactical view is where you come to get a moment of reprieve from the action, survey the field, and make your strategy. It's also where you come to figure out how to deal with absolutely massive enemies, specifically dragons. While the third person behind the character camera can really help place you in the action and make the combat feel brutal and intense, sometimes you just need to get a bird's eye view of things in order to plan your next few rounds.
But wait, Arkham, weren't you just complaining about the camera view in Baldur's Gate? What hypocrisy is this?
Well, first, the 3D characters are much easier to read than these sprites, but it's actually the ability to switch between the two views that's the real magic bullet that makes it all work so seamlessly. The top-down view is for those big picture decisions, and the close-up view for the fine-tuning. This is what really helps strike that balance between the careful and tactical decision-making of a turn-based RPG and the absolute chaos and desperate attack spamming of an ARPG. None of this is perfect though. It would sometimes feel like my mages and archers had a death wish for the way they loved to run into the heart of the battle, even after I specifically told them to go and stand out of the way. There were other times when the character I was controlling would initiate a combat, and then I'd realise that the party was somewhere way far behind me, probably having a smoke and talking about how stupid my helmet looked behind my back. And then in quite a few fights, Shale especially, would just stop operating entirely until I took direct control of her and moved her around. That last one seems like an honest-to-goodness bug. I'm also never a fan of being forced into pre-battle conversations just so enemies can get the drop on me, when in just about every other fight up to that point, I've been using various other tactics to begin the fight with the upper hand. I know sometimes that things need to happen a certain way so that the story can progress, but I'm always going to feel slighted when a cutscene version of my character does something stupid and lands me in a situation I would otherwise never have fallen into. While the early battles all allow you to focus on just controlling one character, while everyone else just dogpiles the enemies, good strategy is going to be the difference between getting absolutely wrecked in a matter of seconds, or executing a near flawless victory on a much larger enemy force. Leaving an enemy mage unchallenged for more than a few seconds can see you being subject to multiple fireballs and other spells with a paralysis-like effect, while not managing enemy hate will see your mages being quickly intercepted by an ogre or other high-threat enemy and removed rapidly from the battlefield. This, for me, is where the rogue plays their part masterfully. Stealth in this game was a choice. And I don't mean that as a euphemism for what the hell were they thinking, like a lot of people do in the mid-2020s. No, I mean they picked a lane with this and they ran with it to its logical conclusion, taking on all the good and bad that comes with it. Stealth is a simple binary system. Either you are stealthed or you are not. Line of sight, footstep sounds, cover and lighting be damned. You can either cloak yourself in shadow and sneak around, or your enemies can see you. And that's it. No questions asked. This system works perfect for a game with a heavy combat focus like Dragon Age. This isn't Oblivion where you're free to slip past as many enemies as you want and complete a dungeon with a 0 body count. No, the rogue in this game is a fighter. They just fight in a very specific way. So with a good enough stealth score, you can send your little backstabber ahead of the crowd to scout out the battlefield. This is perfect for removing any traps that the enemy has set for you to fall into, while setting a few of your own if you have the appropriate skill for that. But it's also perfect for setting up your rogue behind mages or archers who are going to be difficult to get to once the battle is joined. Once you're in position, you can have your warrior come in to grab all the attention, and once those fighters are running off to engage them, the rogue can then get a critical shot on the enemy mage and immediately follow that up with a move like Dirty Fighting to stun them and take them out of the fight before they can become a problem. I only wish the enemy reactivity was better, so that they would be shocked when the warrior came charging through their minefield, and none of the traps they thought they'd set held them back. Yo Sven, put that in the next Divinity game. I've actually already highlighted the weakness to this system though, when I said that this game isn't Oblivion. Because while it's fine that Bioware picked a lane and ran with it, they made the mistake of having a few quests that highlight the issues with their choices. In the city of Denerim, there's a side quest called Crime Wave. This sees the player picking up tips on the locations of good loot to pickpocket or lift from various locations around the city. Our fixer, Mr. Slim Couldry, makes it very clear at the start that he's not a fan of bloodshed on the job, so you have to use pickpocket and stealth skills to get things done. I think the devs did a good job of providing the player with options for the pickpocket missions. After all, you either have the appropriate skill level to lift the item, or you don't. You can increase your odds by being stealth when you go up for the snatch, or you also have the option of talking to the mark and trying to fleece the item from them while in conversation. The break-ins though, these just become more dungeons full of guards with heads to bash in. Slim very quickly wavers his 0 body count rule once the pressure ramps up, and we're basically just back to doing what we do in every dungeon. Since I had high stealth, I actually tried to just cloak my rogue and solo run through the entire last dungeon, grab the loot and bolt. However, regardless of whether or not the enemy is aware of you, entering a certain range will initiate combat, and once it's initiated, you can't leave an area until it's resolved. This is disappointing. It's not bad. Again, I respect the decision to just go all in on one lane, but if they weren't going to implement unique mechanics for these heists, and I understand why they wouldn't because that's a ton of extra work just for one section, then they should have just reframed these dungeons as something other than heists. I would probably have enjoyed them a lot more if I hadn't gone in optimistically hoping for something other than another bloodbath. So that's the gameplay in a nutshell. Travel to places, talk to people, pick up quests, bash in a lot of heads, and return with the loot. Simple on paper, but with the right dressing it remains gripping from start to almost finish. I will say that by the last battle, I was getting pretty exhausted of it all. Even a big RPG can be too long, and since the last battle had to be the biggest of them all, it kinda started to become a slog. At least right up until the Archdemon took the field. And since we're talking about that, let's get into the endgame. Well, we're finally here. I know we took the long way around, but as I said at the start, Ferelden is the star here. By going on this quest, we were learning all about how things work here, and dealing with specific problems that arise out of that. We were getting swept away in this fantastical world, and I felt like I'd be shortchanging you if I didn't drill down into basically all of that. So let's see if we can't wrap all this up in time for tea and biscuits. There are a few critical missions we have to complete before we have the final battle. One of these involves an investigation into Denerim's elven alienage. We can visit here earlier if we get the city elf origins, but this is where we get a real taste of what life is like for city elves in Dragon Age. Everyone looks down on city elves. To the Dalish, they are almost like traitors, who have lost or abandoned their true way of life to live one of submission, while to the humans whose cities they inhabit, elves are second-class citizens and frequently used as scapegoats for basically any problem the ruling nobility don't have an immediate answer for. Since they don't have a voice at the Landsmeet or any say in how things are run in human cities, blaming all your problems on them is an easy out for politicians who don't want to lose favour with anyone who counts. And since all the other politicians are doing it anyway, it creates this illusion of solidarity in with the mix. While it isn't illegal for an elf to have a home outside of the alienage, doing so can be quite dangerous for them. They will be met with suspicion from the humans around them at best, and outright hostility and violence at worst. As such, it's in their interest to remain with their own kind. However, it's clear just from walking around this area that this is easily the poorest area of the city, with buildings in a state of disrepair and things like basic sanitation not being taken care of. This is all very much by design. The humans are in power, and they're going to use that power to make sure that the city elves never have a chance at making their lives better. They can do this by neglecting the alienage, denying access to education, making it more difficult for the elves to own and run businesses, and all manner of other double standards that keep them in a constant survival mode, where just surviving day to day takes so much energy that they don't have any time or opportunities to better themselves. And of course, the humans also get to point at the elves and say, "Look at how they live! How could they not be terrible people?" When the elves try to protest, they are put down with extreme prejudice. The alienage can easily be locked down, and guards can be sent in to quell protests and put anyone who happens to be looking at them funny to the sword in the process. It's authoritarianism 101. I find it interesting that Zevran actually thinks that the city elves need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. While it's true, he came from one of the worst possible starts imaginable. He considers himself to be a personal success story, but like, my bro. Look, I'm not saying that being sold to an assassin's guild is some kind of golden ticket, but once you were in there, they fed you, trained you, gave you a purpose, and opportunities to excel at what you do. Most of these elves never get anything even close to that. You can't compare your life to theirs at all, especially when you find out that Loghain is allowing Tevinter mages to shackle them and ship them back off to the Imperium to sell off as slaves. Yep, what starts as an investigation into a plague soon turns out to be legally sanctioned slavery. And given all the morally grey choices we have in this game, it was nice to have free reign to just burn through this place and put blades in every single one of these scum. I already had plenty of reasons to not just kill, but completely destroy Loghain and deprive him of his entire legend and legacy. But I now had one more reason to do just that. Our other objective is the rescue of Queen Anora. Anora has been left in the care of, aka imprisoned by, one of Loghain's closest confidants, our old friend, Allrendon Howie. Now, I didn't need any particularly strong motivation to take care of this guy, as I still had a family to bring justice to. I wonder what happened to my older brother. However, since Anora was starting to have doubts about her father's honesty, and becoming a potential liability, Loghain decided it was best she was protected from harm by being secluded somewhere she couldn't sow doubt among the other nobility, and there also seemed a high risk that she might even be assassinated to keep her quiet and further Loghain's bid for power. I appreciated the attempt to make this infiltration a little more interesting by having us dress up in Howie Guard uniforms and sneak in through the gardens, but it soon became another round of head cracking. What's funny is how the writers are really going out of their way to make Howie this objectively evil, disgusting human. We confront him in the extensive torture chambers of his house, even liberating an imprisoned noble from there, and he's almost comical in how unrepentant he is for slaying Adarn's father and making his mother beg for mercy. Remember, in the origin, we see these characters are old war veterans who fought the Orlesians side by side for Ferelden's freedom. So his words and actions just seem like pure psychopathy, which I guess does match the extensive torture chamber beneath his house. Anyway, we put a pin in that. Well, about 3 feet of steel to be precise. Then we rescue Anora, get captured, have a daring jailbreak, and then it's on to the Landsmeet. The play is simple. Eamon will tell the nobles of Alistair's royal heritage, and argue his greater claim to the throne than Loghain's. Anora, however, feels this will not go well. She thinks it will seem self-serving of the Wardens to put one of their own on the throne, and suggests she is the better candidate. In truth, Alistair doesn't want to be king, and he feels like, once again, people, including someone he thinks of as a close friend now, are suddenly telling him how his life is going to be. He has no experience with politics or leadership. He didn't even want to be in charge of the Wardens after Duncan died, and now he's being pushed into a position of absolute power. Anora, on the other hand, is widely known as the real power behind Caelan's throne. While he made charismatic speeches and took to the field in times of war, she was the one actually governing the country and taking care of the day-to-day problems while weaving her way through the deadly intrigues of the Ferelden court. You have a few choices here, but one compromise is to have the two marry. Anora is no stranger to a political marriage, even if it's clear that she did love Caelan and still grieves for him. But this would return Ferelden to the kind of status quo it was at before any of this started, and people like regular, stable, and predictable. It's not a bad gambit at all. Up to this point, we've already dabbled in dwarven politics by conspiring to put a king on the throne. While we see from the likes of the Dead Legion and even Oghren that there is honour among the dwarves, both of the candidates are corrupt politicians who play shadowy games and have blood on their hands to further their own ends. There really isn't a good choice here, and getting our way is mostly achieved by descending into the deep roads and smashing up Darkspawn, which is fitting for a quest surrounding the dwarves, all things considered. What we experienced with the Dalish elves was a microcosm of their entire history. Zevran had everything that was dear to him in the world stolen from him by greedy humans who thought they were entitled to it. His family were abused, murdered, and then tossed aside by men who feared no retribution for their actions, and didn't see the elves as worthy of their empathy. The vengeance he enacted upon them was so terrible that it changed him forever. His wrath didn't heal him, and even after centuries, he refused to show any compassion for the men who had destroyed his whole world, and condemned him to a life of personal torment. We can't win this fight with blades. Not really. The only satisfying ending to this is to help Zevran let go of his hate, to make him see that the men who hurt him are long, long gone, and the only one tormenting him now is himself. In choosing to both free the werewolves and end his own life, Zevran isn't just forgiving the werewolves, he's forgiving himself, and letting himself find his ultimate peace. Oh, and there's no small amount of symbolism in Zethrian's revenge coming in the form of the big bad wolf. But we'll talk about that another day. For the mages, it's the battle against the worst possible outcome. All of the safeguards have failed, and demons now infest the tower thanks to the work of blood mages. The Templars have been proven right all along, and they will feel more than justified in slaughtering the circle to its last. While we can overpower the blood mages and defeat the pride demon, the real battle for the mages comes after. Now they have to try and re-establish trust with the Chantry, who already hold them in low regard, and things will likely only get worse before they get better. So with all that in mind, it's quite fitting that our climactic battle to win over the humans is a debate where we have to win self-interested petty nobles over to our side. What I like about the Landsmeet is that it's a quest that we can potentially fail. Well, kinda. If the debate doesn't go our way, things will descend into chaos and a massive fight will ensue, but we can, if we're careful, get the majority of the nobles on our side. As with all politics, there's going to be fanatics. People who have thrown themselves so far into one side of a debate that they won't be budged no matter what. Then there are those whose votes can be secured outside of the debate. Quite a few nobles are spawned into various places around Denerim prior to the meet, and can be spoken to and assisted in order to gain their favour here. Maybe you have to say just the right thing to them, or maybe they need a small favour from you first. Corruption is ever a constant in high society after all, but it's the fence sitters that we have to convince, and that's where the challenge is. Loghain is a charismatic man for sure, and he's well known, a general, a hero of the Elysian War, and he's gone out of his way to smear the Wardens and blame them for Caelan's death since he arrived back in Denerim from Ostagar. Now, a naive person might think it should be as simple as presenting the truth along with evidence to the nobles and having the wheels of justice take its course. But that, unfortunately, is not how politics works. I once heard politics described as show business for ugly people, because facts are much less important in this arena than the person saying them and how that person makes you feel. From the moment you enter, Loghain begins with a good dose of poisoning the well.
Tell us, Warden, how will the Orlesians take our nation from us? Will they deign to send their troops, or simply issue their commands through this would-be prince? What do they offer you? How much is the price of Ferelden honor now?
I'm here to kill Darkspawn, and he's talking about an Orlesian invasion, and claiming that I'm a puppet master looking to place a puppet king on the throne. He has absolutely zero evidence for this, of course. It's a complete lie, or possibly a delusion if he believes it himself. But he doesn't need to prove it. He just needs the gathered nobles to be skeptical about my motives and doubt anything I have to say. He's a master of this game. He deflects every accusation and counters with everything from whatabouts to just straight up lies. He talks like I was personally brainwashing Caelan when I became a Grey Warden only a matter of hours before his death. He doesn't engage with the facts and instead just restates his talking points, and screams propaganda to sow fear and doubt into the nobles. When Howie's crimes are brought up, he throws him under the carriage. When we show evidence of what he was doing to the alienage, he acts like he was doing the elves a favour by having them removed from Denerim, and considers it a regrettable duty. But that's his big strategy. He doesn't need to be right. He just needs the nobles scared enough to look to him as a strong leader. Remember, he's a hero and a general. He has a track record of winning campaigns, so he just needs the nobles to look to him over a Grey Warden. Sure, the Warden's got Eamon's backing, but he and Alistair are unknown quantities, and the threat is very real. And my god, Simon Templeman is just killing it in this scene.
We Fereldens have proven that we will never truly be conquered so long as we are united.
God, we need another king. We are getting another king game, aren't we? You can't win this with high persuasion either. Sometimes the facts, like showing the actual documents that demonstrate his involvement with the Tevinter slavers, can sway a voice to your side. In the end, the final vote is very tight, but it'll ultimately lead to a duel with Loghain, one that I was more than happy to oblige him with. Within All Howie's dungeon, we actually rescue one more Grey Warden, that being Riordan, a Grey Warden from Orlais who came to find out what happened at Ostagar, and was soon after captured and imprisoned by Loghain's men. This is the guy who's going to teach us the Warden's last secret, and even has some interesting ideas about what to do with Loghain. Once defeated, Loghain becomes a deflated man, and seems to gain some kind of clarity about his actions of the last few months. Of course, somewhere in his mind, this was all about protecting the country that he loved, and the land that he fought wars to liberate. But he seems to finally understand that he went way too far. Madness isn't always a fall at the end of it all. We can slowly and deliberately walk into a dark place, telling ourselves that there are good reasons for each step that we take along the way, before reaching a point where we probably know we've gone too far, but we're way too committed to back down now. Still, it's hard to have sympathy for a man who's made my life so difficult for such a long time. And even if my character can view this in an entirely pragmatic light, my best tank and the guy who's been my shield through this entire crisis can't. Redoran suggests putting Loghain through the joining and letting him pay the damages he's done to the Wardens by serving as one of them. It's a tempting ironic punishment, and it would mean that Anora wouldn't have to lose her father. But with Alistair so strongly against it, I opted to land the killing blow. After all, I can't exactly wed a queen to the man who slew her father. Better she reserved that grudge for me than him. With Loghain out of the way, and Alistair wed to Anora and crowned king of all Ferelden, we can finally gather our entire army and venture forth. There's just one last snag to deal with. The real power of the Grey Wardens lies not in their ability to sense Darkspawn via the Taint, but to actually slay an archdemon. During the first Blight, the archdemon Dumat was slain on several occasions, but always rose again after a time. This is because the spirit of an archdemon can enter another Darkspawn. Darkspawn are actually soulless vessels, so they can easily be possessed and their bodies reshaped into that of the dragon once again. In the joining ritual though, the Wardens drink not only Darkspawn blood, but archdemon blood. This makes them a magnet for the soul of the demon upon its death, but since they are not Darkspawn, there's already a soul in their body, and both the archdemon and the Warden's souls annihilate each other. Hell of a price to pay. Sure would be nice if we had a complete bastard who owes us all a debt to be taking the killing blow for us, but I doubt I can just stitch his head back onto his shoulders and say sorry to him now. We are, however, given a way out. The Dragon Age writers were very fond of their third options when presenting their players with difficult choices. It's a real benefit of not having some kind of binary alignment system to fit everything nicely into. On the eve of battle, Morrigan comes to us in our bedchamber and makes us an offer we can't refuse.
What I propose is this. Lay with me, here tonight.
Okay. No, there's more to it than that. She wants to perform a ritual that will create a host for the old god within her. She just needs a donation of some tainted genetic material from you to make this happen. And she's down to make this as enjoyable as possible, She explains then that from the ritual she will birth our child, a child with the soul of an old god. She makes it very clear that this will not be the tainted archdemon, but the original form of the old god. She does not wish the Warden to be involved in its upbringing though. In fact, once all this is over, she plans to vanish from our lives forever. Hell of a choice. After all, Morrigan's only role model for parenting was... And tainted or not, the old gods are supposedly enemies of the Maker, though it's entirely possible that's just Chantry dogma. Gods as a rule can be the jealous type. Well, maybe it's them, or maybe it's the large institutions that benefit from all kinds of power and influence that don't approve of their members leaving to join other organizations, but I digress. So yeah, quite the choice. I said yes this time. Here's hoping Leliana never finds out. The Horde tricks us, appearing at first to march upon Redcliffe before diverting to Denerim to lay waste to the capital. We have to lug a lesser force into the final battle. The first leg of this is kind of cute. We don't actually have a party, and we operate alone, but with the entire crew on the field. It's a nice moment where we all fight together, rather than just 4 of us being front and center, with the others back at camp. The battle is big though, and long, and pretty annoying at times. We can summon in soldiers from one of our conscripted armies to help out in various situations, and the decisions you made previously will affect who shows up. Since I destroyed the Anvil of the Void, I had dwarves helping me out rather than golems, and likewise I spared the mages, so they came to my aid rather than the Templars. On the approach to the final battle, Redoran makes his play to end the Blight and become the next hero of Ferelden, and while he does a good job of grounding the archdemon, he isn't able to land a killing blow before... And so we rush up the tower to face the beast head on and... What the hell? Sandal, I have some questions.
Enchantment!
We climax with a final dragon battle. We've already done 2 of these at this point, but there's no need to get complacent. There are a lot of adds in this fight. We also need to operate some ballistas to damage the beast when it's far away. But when all is finally said and done, the heroes triumph, the Darkspawn armies are broken, the archdemon is felled, and we get the honor of landing the killing blow and becoming a true, living legend. Hey dragon, try Dragon D's not to crush your face! Got him. In the aftermath of the final battle, the Darkspawn flee back to the deep roads, though many are slain as they retreat. Denerim, and indeed the rest of Ferelden, need to bury or burn their dead and rebuild. We can see the crowning of King Alistair, and the union of him and Anora, as the pair prepare to lead Ferelden into their next age. We have a final chance to talk and say goodbye to all our comrades. The people who've slogged through all the blood and shit with us, though Morrigan is notable by her absence. And with all the tears shed, thank yous and hugs shared around, the hero of Ferelden steps out onto a balcony to be greeted by the cheers and adoration of the people whose families, homes, cities, whose very world he saved from a great and terrible darkness. And while this is far from happy ever after for Ferelden, it is at least a moment of peace. Prior to rolling credits, we receive updates on numerous characters who we encountered all throughout the game. From our party to NPCs great and small. The lives of so many that we touched on our journey are laid out to us, and everything is sewn up nice and tightly. This was largely because by the time of release, EA had acquired Bioware, and their experts had decided that Dragon Age wasn't going to be that successful, and certainly wasn't going to get a sequel. We got to have the pew pew guns and the Unreal Engine, and who has time for all these numbers? Of course we know EA were wrong and suck at everything. The surprise success of Dragon Age meant they wanted more. That meant a franchise, a brand, something they could milk until it was bone dry. And in the early 2010s, that meant DLC. Dragon Age got a slew of DLC, some of which was integrated into the main game, while others were small, mod-like quests that took place outside the main game. These all have varying quality, as you could tell at this point that EA were just looking to milk every extra penny they could out of the series. The biggest of these was Dragon Age Awakening, a DLC so big, I'd call it an expansion pack. It told a fairly lengthy, epilogue-style story dealing with events that happened in Ferelden with the Warden and some extra characters immediately after the events of the base game. In my opinion, it's an example of DLC done right. That is to say, Bioware had already made the engine, the art assets, the combat systems, playtested the whole thing, to say nothing of customer feedback after the launch, so all they had to do was take all those resources and shuffle them into some new areas with some new quests. Of course they'd need new scripts and some voice acting, but they had the resources at their disposal to kick out multiple hours of gameplay with a relatively small team in a short amount of time. So while the price of a DLC wouldn't be that of a brand new game, the potential profit margin was a lot higher. And this is a solid DLC. The dialogue and affinity systems are somewhat streamlined this time. This being a shorter game, your opportunities to get to know your teammates are more limited, and you can often stumble onto important gifts for them long before they've had the chance to tell you they'd really love something exactly like that. However, the story is great, and there's a lot of side content focused on managing your own community and strengthening your keep against an assault, which is basically what this game is building towards. That's not to say they bring in new and interesting city management mechanics. No. All this stuff is handled through dialogue choices and finding things while you're out in the field. This is also where the free-spirited apostate Anders and the Spirit of Justice first get introduced to us, along with Anders' most lovely pet cat, Sir Pounce-a-Lot. These two will become more important in Dragon Age 2. Because the role-playing elements are somewhat pared back, the combat is doing even more of the heavy lifting this time, and you can sort of tell they'd already reached the limits of how creative they could get with this iteration of the combat system by the end of the base game. Playing it back in the day, I'd had several months to cool off from Origins before getting my teeth into this, so I was ready and excited for another round. But when you play these two back to back, those later battles really feel like a slog. It's just endless waves of enemies, all of whom have overrun style attacks. These are when an enemy takes a character to the floor and gets to spend a minute or so just taking free bites out of their health, often ending with the character being KO'd. In the base game, they could usually be broken by having another character use a stun attack on the enemy, but that doesn't work in the DLC. What this means is the game can just decide at any time it's going to yeet one of your characters, and if you don't have a paralysis spell to hand or something equally potent, then you can do sweet fuck all about it. I was so ready to be done with this thing by the time I hit the end. The story is interesting enough, but it was clearly time to return to the drawing board, take on all the customer feedback, and start making changes to the game's underlying systems to craft a better overall experience. The problem with this kind of DLC though is cold, hard numbers. Only 30 to 40% of people who purchase a game actually finish it. I mean, we've all got massive digital libraries full of games we haven't even started at this point. Of that percentage of players, only the most hardcore fans would be frothing at the mouth for a big DLC. As such, the sales figures on these kinds of DLCs weren't worth even the significantly reduced investment required to create them. And as we've said before, Bioware was now owned by EA, and EA only cares about one thing. Dragon Age Origins feels in many ways like catching lightning in a bottle. Similar to Baldur's Gate 3, It wasn't just the product of a lengthy development cycle, but the culmination of everything a studio had learned from over a decade of making RPGs, all distilled into its purest form. It is the product of time, patience, hard work, and passion from everyone involved. Given free rein to create their own fantasy setting, Bioware's then elite writing team got to work conjuring Thedas out of a chaotic swirl of fantasy tropes and refining that image of man puts sword in dragon into something far more rich and interesting than another fantasy setting. They made a world with a beating heart all of its own, one full of suffering and problems unique to itself, as well as a healthy dose of the ones we all have to deal with. Faced with the challenge of making a game worthy of being Bioware's next fantasy RPG, their developers created an entirely new engine and took on all the problems that are associated with that. Within that engine, they made a system that allowed for epic fantasy battles against hordes of deadly enemies, where good tactics and quick decision making could take you from being overwhelmed and outnumbered to dominating the battlefield in a matter of seconds, and vice versa. And they made sure you needed to tap the pause button, damn it! But most of all, Bioware created a world we could get lost in, populated it with characters we cared about and wanted to fight and die beside, and then gave us the chance to do exactly that. It was this combination of creative freedom, time and passion that produced a game and a setting that stole the hearts of RPG players and the larger gaming community alike, smashed all expectations, and let the game become a true icon of the genre, a gold standard by which all that came after would be judged against. And it meant that just for a brief moment, in the hearts and minds of RPG lovers everywhere, Bioware ruled the world. Dragon Age was never intended to be a single game. You don't create a whole world, make one game in just one country, and then rush off to create your next one. I mean, maybe if you're writing books you do, but multi-million-dollar gaming projects practically demand more than just one entry. Indeed, the world of Thedas would be expanded upon through novels, and even a tabletop role-playing game which... Well, I bought the first set, and felt it was a solid system overall, but it didn't feel like playing Dragon Age. I could have easily used Dungeons & Dragons, said we are in Thedas, and achieved basically the same result. Maybe the completed system is better overall for that. If you've played the final version, I'd love to know how it is. Bioware were now part of EA, and EA weren't about to let them spend 6 years creating the next iteration of Dragon Age. They wanted their new RPG studio to churn out games with the same frequency as FIFA. And that was a problem. Not only are great games like this, even sequels that don't require an entirely new engine to be built in, not made in that short of a time, but Bioware were used to taking their time and getting things right. Could this push be a positive thing though? Could being forced out of their comfort zone and being made to work within harsher development limitations be the pressure that produces a diamond from the carbon? Or would it just crush the team and stifle their abilities to produce something with even half the quality of the original? The answer to that question is complicated. And it's something we'll discover next time as we flee the Blight and escape all the way to Kirkwall in the Free Marshes, where we learn about a great legend who... Actually, why don't you take it away for us, Miracle of Sound? It is March 5th, 2026. Almost 2 months after I slew the Archdemon and finished the playthrough that I used for this video. I've all but finished editing the video, which stands over 3.5 hours long, and I am quite exhausted. I've just recovered from a cold and spent my birthday at home editing rather than go out and spread that around to my friends. But I am very proud of what I created here. Hearing it all back as I edit, I feel there are definitely places I could have been less descriptive and more analytical, and I've rewritten and re-recorded multiple sections of this one in hope of getting it right. Anyway, if you made it all the way here, then I hope it's because you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it. and not so that you could have more ammunition to complain at me with in the comments. Thank you for clicking and staying to the end regardless. A huge thank you to the Summer of Mark for reading the quotes in the development section. Keep your eyes on his channel for some classic RPG goodness coming soon. Don't forget to like, comment, sub, and ring the bell, and the tip jars are linked below. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to get some rest, and then decide on where I'm going to see the cherry blossoms this spring.